James Harrington spent his childhood in a small town in the South of America. From an early age, he was distinguished by his special intelligence and powers of observation, which set him apart from his peers. His father, Jack Harrington, was known as not the most respectable citizen, often getting involved in dubious deals and criminal fraud. James quickly learned to survive in difficult conditions, watching his father cleverly evade justice. James's mother, Mary, was his complete opposite. She worked as a nurse at a local hospital and tried to give her son the best she could afford. She often told him about the importance of honesty and justice, but her father's influence was stronger. Already in his teens, James learned to pick locks and break into cars, which became a kind of hobby for him. At school, James was not an excellent student, but his abilities in mathematics and physics amazed his teachers. He easily understood the principles of operation of various mechanisms and could easily disassemble and reassemble any device. These skills soon became his main tool in criminal activities. When James turned 16, his father was arrested for major robbery, which became a turning point in the young man's life. He vowed not to repeat his father's mistakes and become an even more skillful and careful criminal. James began working on a plan for his first major heist, using all the knowledge and skills he had accumulated over years of observation and training. The preparation took several months. James meticulously studied security circuit diagrams, perfected his hacking skills, and planned every detail of his crime. He managed to assemble a small team of equally desperate teenagers, ready to take risks for the sake of big profit. On the night of his first robbery, James acted with confidence and composure. He picked the lock of a jewelry store and disabled the security system, allowing him and his team to quickly get inside and take out a large amount of jewelry. This success marked the beginning of his criminal career. With each new robbery, James became more daring and inventive. His name quickly became known in criminal circles, and law enforcement agencies began hunting for him. Despite the best efforts of the police, James always managed to slip away, leaving behind only empty safes and intricate trails that could not be traced. As the years passed, James Harrington became more and more experienced and inventive. His robberies became more and more complex and large-scale, bringing him huge sums of money and increasing fame in the world of crime. He remained elusive despite the best efforts of the police to catch him. The story of James Harrington is a story of how intelligence and ingenuity can turn a man into America's most wanted robber. But each new success brings him closer to an inevitable meeting with justice, and only time will tell how long James will be able to remain free. With each new crime, James Harrington became more and more daring and professional. He studied the latest security technologies to always stay one step ahead. He managed to avoid any mistakes that might give away his location. In his team, he was an indisputable leader, always thinking through every step to the smallest detail. One of the most memorable robberies was in Las Vegas. James decided to take a risk and take on the robbery of the city's largest casino. He spent a long time studying all possible routes of entry, security systems, and security schedules. His plan was so complex and carefully thought out that it took almost 6 months to prepare. On the night of the robbery, James and his team entered the casino through underground communications, disabling the video surveillance and alarm systems. They acted quickly and efficiently, using professional equipment to open safes. The operation went so smoothly that none of the casino employees even suspected something was wrong until the morning when they discovered empty vaults. The haul was incredible, millions of dollars in cash and jewelry. This success became a real sensation in criminal circles, and the name of James Harrington sounded even louder. However, fame and big money brought not only joy but also new dangers. The police have intensified their efforts to nab him. The best detectives and FBI agents began to hunt for James, but he was always one step ahead. He often changed his place of residence, used fake documents, and carefully hid his tracks. Despite all this, he did not stop his robberies, each of which became more daring and complex. One of these robberies was the theft of rare historical artifacts from a private collection in New York. James knew that this blow would bring not only a lot of money, but also increase his reputation among the most sophisticated and dangerous criminals. He assembled a new team of professionals, each of whom was the best in their field. They broke into a heavily guarded mansion using the latest technology to bypass security systems. The plan was risky, but James loved a challenge. He felt that only when he was on the edge did he truly live. They successfully removed the artifacts, avoiding a collision with the guards, and disappeared in an unknown direction. With each new crime, James felt the pressure growing. Former accomplices began to betray him, hoping for leniency from law enforcement agencies. But James always anticipated such betrayals and eliminated the traitors before they could harm him. He understood that his game was becoming more and more dangerous, but it was not in his rules to retreat. James Harrington continued to follow his principles, committing new robberies and remaining elusive. His name became a legend, and every new day he challenged himself and the whole world, trying to avoid the traps set by the police. His criminal career was at its peak, but he knew that somewhere ahead of him, the final battle with justice awaited. However, James was confident that he could hold his own in this fight, as his mind and skills were hardened by years of constant confrontation with the law. Several years passed, and James Harrington was still at large, continuing to commit his daring robberies. His name has become a symbol of elusiveness and skill. Each new blow was more and more sophisticated and complex, and despite the unprecedented efforts of the police, he always eluded pursuit. One of James's most ambitious plans was to rob the Federal Reserve in Los Angeles. The place was known for its unsurpassed security measures and was considered by many to be an impregnable fortress. But for James, this became a new challenge that he could not ignore. Preparation for this robbery took almost 2 years. James carefully studied the building plans, hired the best security specialists, and even introduced his man into the Reserve Security Service. Every detail was thought out to the smallest detail. He knew that the slightest mistake could cost him his freedom or even his life, but the risk only fueled his excitement. On the night of the robbery, James's team acted like a well-oiled machine. They entered the building through the sewer system, disabled the security systems, and quickly neutralized the guards. James personally broke into the main safe using the latest hacking technology. Everything went according to plan, and they soon left the building with a huge amount of money. However, this time James's luck almost ran out. One of the team members, a rookie, made a mistake, which led to the police getting a lead. The real hunt has begun for James Harrington and his team. Despite this, James managed to escape, but now he was pursued not only by law enforcement agencies, but also by crime bosses who were dissatisfied with his successes. James decided to lie low for a while. He moved to a small town on the border with Mexico, changed his appearance, and started life from scratch. He knew that a temporary lull would help him think about his next steps and prepare for the next big blow. But even in the lull, James could not remain idle. He began planning a new robbery, which was to become his largest and most daring crime. This time, his target was one of the largest diamond storage facilities in the world, located in the center of New York. For this heist, James assembled a team of the most experienced professionals, each of whom had unique skills. They spent months preparing, studying building plans, security routes, and all possible scenarios. James knew this robbery would be the pinnacle of his career, and he wasn't about to make any mistakes. Finally, the day came when the plan was to come to fruition. James and his team entered the building under the guise of technical workers. They disabled the security systems and quickly reached the vault. This time, everything went smoothly, and soon they found themselves inside, surrounded by millions of dollars in jewelry and diamonds. But as always, Unforeseen circumstances could change the course of events. The sudden alarm caused the police to arrive earlier than expected. James and his team were trapped, and a real fight for freedom began. James acted quickly and decisively, issuing commands and finding ways out of the most difficult situations. He managed to escape from the encirclement and hide in a labyrinth of underground tunnels. But this time, the hunt for him became even more intense. The police and crime bosses were not going to back down, and James had to use all his experience and skill to stay one step ahead. Despite all the difficulties, James did not lose faith in his abilities. He knew that every new challenge only made him stronger and smarter. His criminal career continued, and each new day brought new opportunities and dangers. James Harrington remained elusive, and his legend continued to grow, capturing the hearts and minds of people around the world. After a tense heist in New York, James Harrington decided to change his strategy. Realizing that each new blow attracted more and more attention, he began to act more secretly and sophisticatedly. Now his target was not only banks and jewelry stores but also large corporations whose security systems seemed impenetrable. One day, James learned about a secret project of one of the largest technology companies in San Francisco. The company was developing a unique artificial intelligence capable of predicting human behavior with incredible accuracy. James realized that this project could be the key to his future successes and decided to take it over. He assembled a new team, including the best hackers and information security specialists. Preparation for the operation took several months. James and his team studied the company's infrastructure, penetrated security weaknesses, and developed a penetration plan. On the night of the robbery, they acted with surgical precision. Hackers broke into the company's security systems, giving James and his team access to the building. Inside, they quickly found a laboratory where all the data for the project was stored. They managed to copy all the information and escape before the guards noticed their presence. This success marked a turning point in James's career. He now had access to technology that other criminals could only dream of. He began using artificial intelligence to plan his heists, predicting the actions of security and police with incredible accuracy. With the help of new technologies, James committed a series of robberies that shocked the entire country. He hacked major banks and corporations, getting away with millions of dollars in jewelry. His methods became more and more sophisticated, and the police were powerless against this level of technology. However, fame and fortune attracted new enemies. Crime bosses, whose businesses were damaged by James's activities, banded together to get rid of him. A real war has begun in the criminal world, and James finds himself at the center of this conflict. He understood that he had to be prepared for any surprises. James strengthened his security, surrounding himself with the most reliable people. He began to use his knowledge and technology for defense, creating impregnable shelters and developing plans in case of attacks. Soon, a new task appeared on the horizon. James learned about the transportation of a huge shipment of gold from one of the most secure banks in the world. This bank was located in Switzerland and was considered practically impregnable. But for James, this was just a new challenge that he could not miss. He carefully planned the operation, using his entire team and technology. They developed a plan to break into the bank, studied gold transportation routes, and prepared for the most daring robbery in history. James knew that this blow would bring him not only wealth, but also even greater fame. On the night of the robbery, James and his team acted as one unit. They entered the bank through a network of underground tunnels, disabling the security systems and neutralizing the guards. James personally led the operation, monitoring every move of his men. They managed to reach the vault and remove the gold, avoiding clashes with the police. But this time, luck was not entirely on their side. One of the team members was captured, and under pressure he revealed some of the information about James's plans. A large-scale operation to capture him began, and the police were hot on his heels. James knew his time was running out. He decided to lie low, hide in obscurity, and develop a new plan that would allow him to get out of the attack. His criminal career continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. James Harrington remained elusive, and his legend lived on, inspiring and terrifying at the same time. After leaving Switzerland after a risky robbery, James Harrington decided to hide for a while in South America. He knew it would take time for the police and crime bosses to cool down. During this time, he focused on strengthening his network and developing new technologies for defense and offense. In a secluded spot on the coast of Brazil, James began work on creating a new, secret hideout. He brought in the best engineers and architects to build a fortress, hidden from view and protected by the latest technology. This place became his headquarters, from where he could manage his network and plan new operations. Despite all the precautions, James knew that sooner or later he would have to return to the arena. He began to receive information about several large corporations in the United States that could become his next targets. One such target caught his particular attention, an international medical device company stocking rare and expensive drugs. To implement his plan, James decided to introduce one of his best people into the company. Alexei was a master of disguise and possessed unique skills in social engineering. Under the guise of a security engineer, he infiltrated the company and began collecting information about internal processes and security systems. Months of preparation were crowned with success. Alexei was able to provide James with detailed plans of the building and a security schedule. James developed the perfect infiltration plan, taking into account all possible risks. They chose a night when the company was updating its security system, which would distract the attention of security guards. The operation has begun. James and his team entered the building following Alexei's instructions. They bypassed all security systems and reached the vault. However, this time everything did not go so smoothly. A hidden alarm went off which Alexei did not notice. Soon the building was surrounded by police, and James realized that they had walked into a trap. A desperate fight began. James and his team fought to escape the encirclement. Alexei, realizing that their chances of salvation were decreasing every minute, proposed a radical solution. He used one of the experimental technologies developed by James to cut off the power in the area where the building was located. This gave them a chance to escape. Using the darkness and chaos, James and his team were able to get out and hide in the maze of city streets. They lost part of their loot, but most importantly, they remained alive and free. This experience made James reconsider his methods and realize that every step had to be even more carefully thought out. Returning to his refuge in Brazil, James decided it was time to change his priorities. He began working on creating a new, even more secret and secure network that would allow him to operate regardless of geographic location. His plans included the creation of autonomous cells, each of which could work independently, but, if necessary, unite to carry out the most complex and large-scale operations. Meanwhile, news of his daring escape spread throughout the world. Police stepped up their efforts to catch him, but James remained elusive. His name became synonymous with genius and courage in the criminal world, and many dreamed of becoming part of his team. James's plans became more and more ambitious. He began considering attacks on the world's largest financial institutions, aiming to undermine economic stability and cause chaos. He knew that this would require even more resources and effort, but nothing was impossible for him. James Harrington continued his path, challenging the whole world and remaining elusive. His legend grew, and with it his confidence that he could overcome any obstacles in his path. Each new day brought new challenges and opportunities, and James was ready to accept them, knowing that even greater and more dangerous adventures awaited him. For several months, James Harrington and his team worked hard to create their new secret network. He used all his connections and resources to find and attract the most talented specialists from various fields, from hackers to engineers, from masters of disguise to explosives experts. James wanted each cell of his network to be autonomous and able to act independently, but at the same time remain part of a huge mechanism controlled by him. One of the key figures in the new network was Marcus Blake, a talented hacker with whom James had already dealt in the past. Marcus was known for his incredible skills in hacking and creating complex software algorithms. He developed a system that allowed cells to exchange information and coordinate their actions without the risk of detection. The first major operation of the new network was planned for the fall. The target was one of the largest banks in Tokyo, where the assets of many rich and powerful people were kept. James understood that this operation would be extremely difficult, but it was precisely such challenges that attracted him. Preparations for the operation were thorough. James sent one of his cells to Tokyo in advance to study all the details and prepare the way for the main attack. The team worked undercover, infiltrating the bank and gaining access to critical information. Marcus Blake, with the help of his programs, ensured uninterrupted communication and safety of all participants in the operation. The day of the robbery arrived. James and his team operated with the precision of surgeons. They entered the bank building through a system of underground tunnels that were built at the beginning of the last century. Using the latest technology, they disabled security systems and disguised their presence. James personally led the operation, monitoring his men's every move. When they reached the vault, Marcus remotely hacked the security system, allowing the team to gain access to the safes. They quickly loaded everything valuable into prepared containers and began to leave. But suddenly, the unexpected happened. One of the security guards, who previously worked in the special services, noticed strange behavior in the security system and called for reinforcements. An alarm began and the building was soon surrounded by police. James realized that they had fallen into a serious trap. Using his skills and experience, James quickly assessed the situation and made a decision. He gave the command for an emergency retreat. The team split up to confuse their pursuers. James took it upon himself to distract the main group of police to give his men a chance to escape. Using secret passages and pre-prepared routes, James and part of his team were able to escape from the surrounded building. They hid in the labyrinth of city streets, using fake documents and changing their appearance. Marcus secured their route using hacked security cameras and false leads. Despite the loss of some of the spoils and unexpected risks, the operation was partially successful. James and his team remained free, and this only strengthened his reputation in the criminal world. He understood that now he needed to act even more carefully, but also knew that each such operation only made him stronger. Returning to his hideout, James began planning new operations. He understood that his opponents were becoming more and more persistent, and each new blow had to be even more accurate and sophisticated. But it was precisely such challenges that made his life interesting and rich. His name became a legend, and many criminals dreamed of working under his leadership. James continued to build his empire, challenging the world and remaining elusive. His story was not over yet, and new adventures and challenges awaited him, which he was ready to accept with an open heart and a cool mind. After a successful, albeit difficult operation in Tokyo, James Harrington decided to temporarily change continents. He knew that his pursuers had become more active, and he needed time to think about new steps and let the police cool down a little. James headed to Europe, where new opportunities and challenges awaited him. In Paris, James made contact with local crime bosses, who helped him settle in and penetrate the European network. Here he began to develop plans for new robberies, using his innovative technology and ingenuity. One of his targets was the famous treasure vault in London, which was considered impenetrable. The preparation for this robbery was long and laborious. James studied all aspects of the security system and assembled a team of the best specialists in Europe. He spent several months working out the plan in detail and ensuring every step of his operation. An important element was a new member of the team, a French explosives expert who could open safes without noise or destruction. On the day of the robbery, James's team entered the vault under cover of darkness. They used complex diversionary maneuvers to confuse the guards and entered through abandoned underground tunnels. Their goal was clear: several $1 million in jewelry and antiques. However, this time things did not go so smoothly. There were unexpected changes in the vault's security system that James was unaware of. Soon after the entry, the alarm was raised, and the security began to act harmoniously and quickly. James and his team were trapped, and it seemed that their failure was inevitable. But James wouldn't be James if he didn't have a plan for such emergencies. He used explosives to create a distracting explosion and create an escape route. The team got out, but the police were already on the way. A tense chase ensued through the streets of London. James and his team were forced to split up to increase their chances of escape. James chose the riskiest route, leading the police through rooftops and narrow alleys. He managed to confuse his pursuers and took refuge in one of the old warehouses on the outskirts of the city. Despite the losses, the operation brought James and his team significant booty. They returned to their hideout, hiding from their pursuers and contemplating their next steps. James understood that now he needed to act even more secretly and carefully so as not to fall into a trap. James decided to spend some time in Spain, where his network had deep roots and reliable shelters. Here he began to develop a new plan, aimed at one of the largest banks in Madrid. This operation was to be the pinnacle of his career and bring huge profits. But even here in Spain, James could not completely relax. He understood that his enemies were not asleep and that every mistake he made could be fatal. So he strengthened his security measures, implemented new technologies to protect his team, and began working to improve his network. James Harrington remained an elusive and brilliant criminal, continuing his activities, challenging the whole world. His legend grew, and each new day brought new opportunities and dangers. James knew that his story was far from over, and new adventures awaited him ahead, which would require all his skills and abilities. After spending some time in Spain, James Harrington decided it was time for his next big thing. He knew that the bank in Madrid was better protected than others, and therefore this challenge was especially attractive to him. Preparations began with a thorough examination of all aspects of the security of the bank and its surrounding buildings. James and his team infiltrated the bank's customer service staff to gain access to internal systems and work schedules. At the same time, James continued to expand his network and strengthen his connections in the criminal world. He established contacts with influential figures in Italy, Germany, and Switzerland, which allowed him to obtain information and resources from different parts of Europe. This was necessary, since the upcoming robbery required maximum coordination and professionalism. The operation in Madrid was scheduled for the night the bank was conducting its annual security audit. This meant that there would be fewer people inside, but the security systems would be top-notch. James understood that they would have only a few hours to get inside, carry out the loot, and escape. The night of the operation arrived. James and his team arrived early, taking up positions in the surrounding buildings. The signal was given, and they began to act. Marcus Blake hacked the security systems remotely, disabling the cameras and alarms for a few minutes to give the team time to get inside. Using fake passes and professional equipment, James's team got through several layers of security. They reached the vault where their main target was waiting for them, millions of euros in cash and valuable documents. Everything went according to plan until one of the guards discovered traces of their penetration and raised the alarm. The police arrived on the scene within minutes. An intense fight began. James and his team were forced to act quickly and decisively. They used smoke grenades and traps to delay the police and buy time. As a result, they managed to take out most of the loot and escape through tunnels prepared in advance. Once free, James and his team headed to a safe haven outside the city. They knew that now the police would be looking for them with redoubled force, and their every step had to be thought out to the smallest detail. James knew it was time to lay low and reconsider his methods. Returning to Spain, James decided to stop major operations for a while and focus on strengthening his network and developing new technologies for protection. He understood that his enemies were becoming more and more persistent, and his every action must be verified to the smallest detail. But even in these relatively calm times, James did not sit idle. He began working on a new project, creating his own cryptocurrency that would allow him and his team to securely transfer money and finance their transactions. Marcus Blake took on the technical side of the project, developing a system that would be untraceable. The project progressed successfully, and soon the new cryptocurrency was launched. This gave James new opportunities to finance his operations and allowed him to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. He knew that he now had a tool that would allow him to act even more covertly and effectively. New opportunities opened up for James Harrington, and he was ready to take on any challenge. His story continued, and each new day brought new adventures and challenges. James remained an elusive and brilliant criminal, challenging the entire world and continuing his activities with incredible ingenuity and courage. Time passed, and James Harrington continued to develop his empire. His cryptocurrency was gaining popularity in criminal circles, providing secure and discreet money transfers. This gave him a huge advantage over his competitors and pursuers. James understood that technology was the key to his success and continued to invest in developing new solutions. One of these developments was an artificial intelligence system capable of analyzing huge amounts of data and predicting the actions of law enforcement agencies. With this system, James could plan his operations with even greater precision and minimize risks. Marcus Blake and his team of hackers worked to improve the algorithms so that the AI could predict even the most unexpected police moves. One day, James received information about the largest transport of cash that was supposed to pass through Germany. This convoy was guarded to the highest standard, and a robbery of this magnitude could be the most daring crime of his career. James understood that preparing for this operation would require maximum concentration and the use of all his resources. The team began to prepare. They carefully studied the convoy route, the security system, and all possible scenarios. The artificial intelligence system helped predict possible police actions and find weaknesses in security. James decided to use several groups to confuse his pursuers and ensure the success of the operation. The day of the robbery arrived. James's team acted quickly and smoothly. They staged a series of diversions to confuse the security and police. At this time, the main group, armed with the latest technology, attacked the convoy. The AI system helped coordinate the team's actions, ensuring minimal losses and maximum efficiency. The operation went almost flawlessly. The team managed to seize a significant portion of the cash and escape before reinforcements arrived. James understood that this success would attract even more attention from the police, but he was ready for new challenges. His network became more and more powerful, and each new success strengthened its position. However, success did not come without consequences. As a result of the robbery, several members of the team were detained, and the police launched a large-scale operation to find them. James knew he had to act quickly to protect his people and prevent the police from getting to him. He activated his connections and used all available resources to help his comrades escape justice. At the same time, James began planning his next operation. This time his target was one of the largest banks in Zurich, known for its strict security measures. James realized that this operation would require even more effort and ingenuity, but he was ready to take on the challenge. In Zurich, James used his technology and connections to gather the necessary information. He studied every aspect of the bank's security system and developed a plan that would allow his team to break in and take out huge amounts of money. Every step was thought out to the smallest detail, and James knew that this time there could be no room for mistakes. The operation began at night. The team entered the bank building through the ventilation system, disabling the cameras and alarms using Marcus's hacking technology. They reached the vault and began to take out the money, but suddenly a hidden alarm went off, which could not be detected in advance. Soon the building was surrounded by police. James and his team were trapped and a fierce battle ensued. Using smoke grenades and traps, James was able to buy some time. He understood that this time he needed to act even faster and more decisively in order to get out alive. The team managed to escape from the building through a previously prepared tunnel, but the police were not far behind. A tense chase ensued through the streets of Zurich. James used all his skills and technology to confuse his pursuers and escape into the city. As a result, he and his team managed to escape pursuit and hide in a safe place. Returning to his hideout, James realized that his game was becoming increasingly dangerous. He understood that each new success attracted more and more attention, and he needed to be even more careful. But despite all the difficulties, James Harrington continued his activities, remaining an elusive and brilliant criminal. His story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. James knew that even greater and more dangerous adventures lay ahead of him, and he was ready to accept them with an open heart and a cool mind. After a tense operation in Zurich, James Harrington realized that he needed something bigger to turn attention away from his tracks and strengthen his reputation in the criminal underworld. He decided to take on a case that would not only bring him a huge fortune but also call into question the very ability of law enforcement agencies to catch him. His next target was the largest casino in Las Vegas, a legendary place where millions of dollars were kept. James knew that this robbery would be a real challenge, but it was these types of cases that attracted him most. Preparations began with a thorough study of all aspects of casino security, its surveillance system, and security practices. James reassembled his team, adding several new specialists to it. Among them was Clara, a master of disguise and actress who could sneak into any place without arousing suspicion. He also brought in Frank, a former intelligence agent who knew all the intricacies of law enforcement and could predict their actions. The plan was worked out to the smallest detail. James decided to use a distraction. That same evening, several false robberies were to take place in Las Vegas, which would attract the attention of the police. During this time, his team will operate in the casino. The evening of the robbery has arrived. Everything went according to plan. Fake robberies began to distract the police, and James's team infiltrated the casino under the guise of staff and high-ranking guests. Clara played the role of a wealthy heiress, attracting the attention of the guards and distracting them from the rest of the team. Using the latest technology, Marcus hacked into the surveillance system, giving James's team a few minutes to act. They made their way into the casino vault and began taking out money and jewelry. Everything went smoothly until one of the guards became suspicious and raised the alarm. Panic set in, and James's team was forced to act quickly. Using smoke grenades and pre-prepared escape routes, they began to retreat. But the police, despite the distractions, were already on their way. A tense chase ensues through the bustling streets of Las Vegas. James and his team split up to increase their chances of escape. Clara, using her disguise, blended into the crowd, and Marcus distracted his pursuers by hacking the city's traffic light control systems. James led the main group himself, using underground tunnels and secret passages that only he knew about. Despite all the difficulties, the team managed to escape and reach a pre-prepared shelter outside the city. The operation brought them huge loot, but James knew that their safety was now at risk. He decided to lay low for a while and reconsider his methods in order to be ready for new challenges. Returning to his hideout, James began developing new strategies and technologies for future operations. He understood that his every move would now be even more carefully monitored, and he needed to be prepared for any surprises. Meanwhile, news of the daring robbery in Las Vegas spread around the world. James Harrington's name was once again on the front pages of the newspapers, and his reputation was further strengthened. He became a true legend in the criminal world, and many criminals dreamed of working under him. However, James was not going to stop there. He knew that even more ambitious and dangerous plans awaited him ahead. His story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. James Harrington remained an elusive and brilliant criminal, continuing his activities with incredible ingenuity and courage. After a daring heist in Las Vegas, James Harrington decided it was time for the most ambitious plan of his career, the heist of the world's largest gold vault located in Fort Knox. This operation would not only bring him incredible wealth, but would also be his greatest achievement, calling into question the ability of any security system to contain him. Preparations for this operation began long before its execution. James and his team spent months studying every aspect of Fort Knox's security system. They developed complex schemes, used forged documents, and infiltrated their people to gain access to critical information. James knew that the slightest mistake could cost them not only their freedom, but also their lives. Marcus Blake developed a new, even more powerful AI that could analyze the behavior of guards and predict their actions with incredible accuracy. Clara and Frank helped coordinate the team's actions, creating diversions and planning escape routes. The day of the operation arrived. James and his team were ready to take on their most daring mission yet. They used diversions to confuse security and police and entered Fort Knox under the guise of maintenance workers. Timing was a critical factor, and every step was calculated down to the second. Once inside, the team quickly disabled the security systems using equipment developed by Marcus. James personally led the operation, coordinating the actions of his men and monitoring every step. They reached the gold storage facility and began loading the loot into prepared containers. But unexpectedly, there was a failure. One of the team members, a new recruit, accidentally activated the alarm. The entire facility was immediately locked down, and security began to act. James knew that they now had very little time. He reacted quickly, using smoke grenades and diversionary maneuvers to buy time to retreat. An intense fight began. James's team was forced to improvise, finding escape routes and avoiding confrontations with the guards. Using their skills and technology, they were able to break through to pre-prepared tunnels and escape, leaving behind false trails. Once free, the team headed to a safe haven, where vehicles and a new identity for each of them awaited them. James knew that now their pursuers would act even more aggressively, and they needed to hide for a while. Returning to his hideout, James began to assess the results of the operation. Despite unforeseen difficulties, they managed to remove a significant part of the gold, and it was a huge success. But James understood that each new robbery made his enemies more persistent and resourceful. He decided it was time for drastic changes. James began to develop a new plan that would allow him and his team not only to continue their activities, but also to create a real criminal empire capable of operating regardless of geographical location and government restrictions. Using his cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence technologies, James began to create a network of independent cells, each of which could act autonomously, but if necessary, unite to carry out large operations. He understood that the future of crime was not only strength and ingenuity, but also the ability to adapt to constantly changing conditions. His network has become even more powerful and elusive. James Harrington continued to be a legend in the criminal world, challenging the world and continuing his work with incredible ingenuity and courage. Each new day brought new challenges and opportunities, and James was ready to take them on, knowing that his story was far from over. After the successful robbery of Fort Knox, James Harrington and his team holed up in hiding, rethinking their methods and strategies. He knew that the attention to his actions had become unprecedented, and now his every operation had to be even more carefully thought out. Realizing that it was dangerous to stay in one place for too long, James decided to move to Asia, where new challenges and opportunities awaited him. He chose Singapore, known for its developed infrastructure and high level of technology. In Singapore, he planned to use his skills and knowledge to create a new base of operations. The first thing James did was establish contacts with local crime bosses, enlisting their support and cooperation. He knew that joining forces would make his actions more effective and covert. James also began developing new robbery plans by scouting local banks and financial institutions. One of the targets was the largest bank in Singapore, which stored a huge amount of assets and jewelry. James knew that this strike had to be perfectly planned to avoid unnecessary attention and minimize risks. He began to prepare a team, introducing his people into the bank under the guise of employees. Preparation for the operation took several months. Marcus Blake has improved AI so that it can analyze not only security systems, but also the behavior of bank employees. This allowed James's team to operate with incredible precision and anticipate possible threats. Finally, the day of the robbery arrived. The team entered the bank using fake passes and disguised equipment. They acted quickly and decisively, disabling security systems and avoiding surveillance cameras. James personally led the operation, supervising every step of his men. They reached the vault and began taking out money and jewelry. Everything was going according to plan until one of the bank employees noticed something was wrong and called security. An alarm began, and James's team found itself in a difficult situation. Using smoke grenades and traps, they began to retreat. Marcus remotely hacked the building's control system to create chaos and hamper security's work. James and his team escaped through the ventilation system, disappearing into the maze of Singapore streets. Despite unexpected difficulties, the operation produced significant booty. James understood that he now needed to act even more secretly and carefully to avoid persecution. It decided to temporarily pause major operations and focus on strengthening its network and developing new technologies. In Singapore, James found several talented hackers to join his team. Together, they began work on creating a new cryptocurrency platform that would allow anonymous and secure transactions. This platform became the basis for financing all future operations. Meanwhile, news of the daring bank robbery in Singapore spread throughout the world. Police stepped up their efforts to catch James, but he remained elusive. His name was back on the front page, and his reputation continued to grow. James Harrington knew his story was far from over. Each new day brought new challenges and opportunities, and he was ready to take them on with an open heart and a cool mind. His criminal empire continued to grow and develop, and James was sure that even more grandiose and dangerous adventures awaited him. After a successful robbery in Singapore, James Harrington decided to change his tactics and style of operations. Realizing that his previous methods had become too predictable, he began to look for new ways to achieve his goals. Attention to his activities increased, and James's every move was now carefully monitored not only by law enforcement agencies, but also by competitors in the criminal world. He traveled to Hong Kong to establish contacts with local criminal gangs and explore new heist opportunities. Hong Kong, with its extensive system of financial institutions and high technology, became the ideal platform for the next stage of his career. James met with Lin Zhang, a powerful crime lord who ran a large network of smugglers and hackers. In exchange for a share of the spoils, Lin offered James access to his resources and protection. They quickly found common ground and struck a deal that allowed James to use Lin's infrastructure for his own purposes. Soon, James learned about a major jewelry exhibition that was to be held in one of the most prestigious hotels in Hong Kong. This was an excellent opportunity for a high-profile and profitable robbery. He assembled a team, including new specialists provided by Lin Zhang. The robbery plan was developed taking into account all possible risks and nuances. James decided to use a distraction method. On the night of the robbery, false incidents would occur in several areas of Hong Kong, which would distract the police and security from the hotel. The team entered the building under the guise of maintenance personnel and began to act. When they reached the showroom, Marcus Blake, who was off-site, hacked into the security system, disabling the cameras and alarms. James's team acted quickly and efficiently, loading the jewelry into prepared containers. But suddenly, the unexpected happened. One of the guests noticed something was wrong and raised the alarm. Panic set in, and James's team was forced to improvise. Using smoke grenades and diversionary maneuvers, they began to retreat. James and Lin Zhang agreed on an escape route through a system of underground tunnels known only to a few. As a result, the team managed to escape and deliver the loot to a safe place. However, the consequences of this operation were significant. The Hong Kong police tightened security measures, and attention to James's actions increased even more. He understood that his activities were now under close surveillance, and any mistake could cost him his freedom or even his life. James decided to temporarily hide in southern China, where Lin Zhang provided him with shelter and funds to develop new plans. He began working on creating a new network of safe houses and secret routes that would allow him and his team to move quickly and undetected throughout the region. During this time, James also began improving his cryptocurrency platform to provide even greater anonymity and security for transactions. He understood that the future of the criminal world depended on the ability to adapt to new technologies and use them to achieve their goals. James Harrington remained an elusive and brilliant criminal whose legend continued to grow. He knew that new challenges and opportunities lay ahead, and he was ready to take them on with confidence and determination. His story was far from over, and every new day brought new adventures and challenges that he was ready to overcome. Hiding in southern China, James Harrington continued to build his criminal empire. He realized that his enemies were not asleep, and each new operation must be more daring and innovative. At this time, James received news that could change his entire game. Marcus Blake, his longtime associate and brilliant hacker, came across rumors about a certain Black Archive, a secret data warehouse containing incriminating evidence on the world's largest leaders, businessmen, and crime bosses. This data could become a real weapon capable of bringing the entire criminal world under James's control. James and Marcus began investigating to find out more about this archive. After weeks of searching and hacking into several secure servers, they discovered that the Black Archive was being kept in a secret facility in the Swiss Alps. The facility was heavily guarded and it seemed impossible to penetrate, but James was not one to back down from difficulties. For this operation, James assembled an elite team, including the best specialists in various fields: a security hacker, a master of disguise, an expert on explosive devices, and even a former Special Forces soldier. He understood that the success of this mission would require teamwork and absolute precision. The first step was to gain access to the object itself. Using his connections, James was able to obtain fake documents that allowed his team to enter the territory under the guise of technical specialists. They acted undercover, studying security systems and possible escape routes. On the night of the operation, James's team infiltrated the facility by disabling the cameras and alarm systems using Marcus's equipment. They moved quickly and silently, using every second to reach the data storage. The last barrier stood in their way: a complex encryption system protecting the Black Archive. Marcus connected to the terminal and began hacking. However, the hidden protection system unexpectedly worked, and the object was instantly blocked. Security began to act, and James realized that they had very little time. The team was forced to engage in combat, using smoke grenades and diversions to buy time. Marcus, despite the pressure, managed to complete the hack and copy all the data. James and his team began to retreat using previously prepared routes. They escaped from the facility and disappeared into the forests of the Alps, avoiding pursuit. It was a tense and dangerous mission, but it was a success. Returning to the hideout, James and Marcus began analyzing data from the Black Archive. What they found exceeded all their expectations. The archive contained not only incriminating materials, but also information about secret accounts, political intrigues, and plans of the largest criminal groups. With this data, James got his hands on a powerful weapon. He began using information to manipulate and control his enemies, forming new alliances and eliminating competitors. His influence grew, and he soon became one of the most powerful criminal leaders in the world. But James knew that having such data made him a target for many. He increased security measures, creating a new network of safe houses and secret routes around the world. Every step he took was now carefully thought out to avoid possible threats. Meanwhile, rumors about the Black Archive began to spread in the criminal world. Many tried to find out who exactly took possession of this information, but James and his team remained elusive. They continued their activities, expanding their influence and strengthening their positions. James Harrington became a legend whose name inspired fear and respect. His story continued, and each new day brought new challenges and opportunities. With the Black Archive at his disposal, James was ready to take on any challenge and prove that he was the greatest criminal mastermind. After an intense expedition to Peru and the integration of the Codex Aegis into his security systems, James Harrington decided it was time for a new operation. This time, the target was one of the most prestigious jewelry stores in Chicago. The store was famous for its unparalleled collection of rare jewelry, and a heist could yield huge loot as well as thrust the team back into the spotlight. Planning began with a thorough review of all aspects of the store and its security system. James knew that Chicago was a city with high law enforcement activity, and any mistake could be fatal. Marcus used his hacking skills to gain access to the building's plans and security schedule. He also hacked into the CCTV system so the team could monitor the store in real time. Clara and Frank traveled to Chicago under the guise of wealthy clients to personally inspect the store and assess possible routes of entry. They studied all the entrances and exits, observed the behavior of the guards and employees. Their information was invaluable in developing the robbery plan. James decided to use a distraction technique that had worked successfully in the past. On the night of the robbery, several false incidents were supposed to occur in different parts of the city, which would distract the police and security from the jewelry store. The team carefully prepared all the necessary equipment, including hacking devices, smoke grenades, and camouflage. Finally, the night of the operation arrived. James's team arrived on the scene, ready to take action. False incidents began a few blocks away from the store, attracting police attention. Marcus hacked the alarm system and disabled the security cameras, giving James's team a few minutes to break in. Clara and Frank entered first, using fake passes and equipment to break down doors. They quickly took out the guards using tranquilizers and gave the signal to the rest of the team. James and the rest of the team got inside and began collecting the jewelry. Everything went according to plan until one of the guards, whom they did not notice, managed to raise the alarm. The sounds of the siren echoed throughout the building, and the team realized that time was running out. James quickly made a decision to use smoke grenades and pre-prepared escape routes. In the thick smoke, The team began to quickly retreat, avoiding clashes with the guards and the arriving police. Marcus, being at a distance, controlled the traffic light control system in the city, creating traffic jams and interfering with his pursuers. James and his team split up to confuse the police and each headed to pre-arranged exit points. Despite the sudden alarm, the operation produced significant booty. James's team successfully fled the crime scene and reached a safe haven. They knew that the police would be looking for them with redoubled force, but they were ready for any challenge. Returning to their hideout, James and his team began assessing their loot and planning their next steps. They knew that with each new robbery their reputation was growing, and that now they needed to be even more careful. However, James was not going to stop there. He continued to develop his empire, using the Black Archive and the Code of Aegis to strengthen his power. His influence spread throughout the world, and each new day brought new opportunities and challenges. James Harrington remained an elusive and brilliant criminal whose legend continued to grow. He knew that even greater and more dangerous adventures lay ahead of him, and he was ready to accept them with confidence and determination. After successfully robbing a jewelry store in Chicago, James Harrington and his team enjoyed their loot and planned new operations. However, they did not know that their next mission would be the most difficult and risky of their careers. James's next target was the largest bank in Los Angeles, known for its strict security system and huge reserves of cash and precious metals. James and his team began their preparations with their usual meticulousness. They studied building plans, analyzed security schedules, and hacked video surveillance systems. However, this time things didn't go according to plan. On the night of the robbery, James's team entered the bank as planned, but immediately ran into an unexpected problem. The alarm system was updated at the last minute, and Marcus did not have time to take these changes into account. As a result, as soon as the team began to break into the vault, the alarm went off, raising the alarm. The bank building was instantly filled with security and police, who arrived on the scene faster than expected. James and his team are trapped. Panic set in, and the plan they had worked out so carefully began to crumble. Clara, while in one of the corridors, came across a group of guards and a shootout ensued. James, realizing that their situation was critical, gave the order for an emergency retreat. The team began to retreat, but the police had already surrounded the building. They used smoke grenades and pre-prepared routes to escape, but the situation was getting worse. Frank, covering the team's retreat, was wounded in the leg and barely managed to take refuge in one of the offices. James, realizing that he could not leave his man, returned for him. Together, they made their way through the security and reached the pre-prepared exit, but it cost them precious time. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to hack the city's security camera system to help the team escape. But the police were one step ahead. They blocked all possible escape routes, and the team found themselves in even greater danger. Having escaped from the bank, James and his team began a desperate flight through the streets of Los Angeles. They split up to confuse their pursuers, but this only made the situation worse. Clara was ambushed and arrested. James and Frank, having barely escaped a collision with the police, took refuge in one of the abandoned buildings. Realizing that the operation had failed and the team was in danger, James began to develop a rescue plan. He contacted Lin Zhang, who offered help in exchange for a portion of the loot. The situation was becoming increasingly tense, and James knew that time was against them. Using his connections and resources, James organized a daring operation to free Clara. He knew it would be dangerous, but he couldn't leave his man in the lurch. Marcus remotely hacked the prison's control system, creating distractions and opening routes for escape. The night of liberation has arrived. James and Frank, armed and ready for anything, entered the prison. They acted quickly and decisively, disabling security systems and avoiding guards. Having found Clara, they took her out of the cell and began to retreat. This time, however, the police were ready. A shootout ensued, and James realized that the situation was critical. They managed to escape from prison and hide in the dense forests on the outskirts of the city, but it cost them enormous effort and resources. Returning to their hideout, the team began to assess the consequences of their actions. They understood that they had made serious mistakes, and now their pursuers would act even more aggressively. James knew he needed to rethink his methods and be ready for new challenges. However, despite all the difficulties, he was not going to give up. James Harrington remained a brilliant criminal, ready to take on any challenge and overcome any obstacle. His story continued, and each new day brought new adventures and challenges that he was ready to overcome with confidence and determination. After the intense events in Los Angeles, James Harrington and his team realized they needed to change their strategy and find a new direction. Realizing that their methods had become too predictable, James decided to go into hiding for a while and develop an entirely new approach to his operations. In a safe house in Mexico, James gathered a team to discuss future plans. Clara, having recovered from her wounds, was ready for new challenges. Marcus continued to improve his hacking skills and develop new technologies for hacking and security. Frank, despite his injuries, remained faithful to his duties. James came up with an idea that immediately caught everyone's interest. They planned to organize a series of robberies in several countries at the same time in order to confuse their pursuers and confuse law enforcement agencies. These robberies were supposed to take place under the guise of a large-scale event that would attract the attention of the whole world. This opportunity presented itself during the Olympic Games in Tokyo. James decided to take advantage of this event to carry out 3 major robberies in different countries, one in Tokyo, the second in London, and the third in New York. The plan was daring and complex, but it was precisely such challenges that inspired James. Preparation began with developing detailed plans for each heist. Marcus took responsibility for coordinating all activities and ensuring secure communication between teams. Clara and Frank, along with James, went on reconnaissance to study targets and possible infiltration routes. In Tokyo, the target was the largest jewelry store, which had expanded its collection of jewelry during the Olympic Games. In London, the team planned to rob a private bank known for its antique valuables. In New York, their goal was an elite auction house where rare works of art were exhibited. The day of the operation arrived. In Tokyo, the team entered a jewelry store disguised as tourists. Using their camouflage and hacking skills, they quickly disabled the security system and began collecting the jewelry. Meanwhile, in London, another part of the team, including Clara and Frank, infiltrated the bank using false documents and safe-cracking equipment. In New York, James personally led an operation at an auction house where they seized rare works of art. Everything went according to plan, but the unexpected happened in Tokyo. One of the store employees, noticing something was wrong, raised the alarm and security responded faster than expected. A tense chase ensued and the team was forced to improvise. Marcus, monitoring the situation remotely, used his skills to hack into the city's surveillance systems and create false leads for the police. In London and New York, operations went more smoothly, but tensions were still felt. The teams in both cities successfully completed their missions and began their retreat. They used pre-prepared routes and safe houses for shelter. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, James's team was still trying to get out of the encirclement. Using smoke grenades and camouflage, they made their way through city streets, avoiding confrontations with the police. Ultimately, they managed to hide in one of the abandoned buildings on the outskirts of the city. Returning to their hideout, James and his team began to evaluate the results of the operations. Despite unforeseen difficulties in Tokyo, the overall plan worked. Heists in 3 countries simultaneously created chaos and confused law enforcement, allowing James's team to escape with the loot. James understood that now their pursuers would be even more active, but he was ready for this. He continued to develop his technology and strengthen his connections in the criminal world to stay one step ahead. After a series of daring robberies in Tokyo, London, and New York, James Harrington and his team realized that the attention on them had increased exponentially. The FBI and other international law enforcement agencies joined forces to catch them. They knew that their enemies would act with renewed vigor. Despite all the precautions, one night while James's team was in one of their hideouts in Mexico, they were ambushed. The FBI, using information from an infiltrated agent, launched a surprise attack on their base. As a result of this operation, half of the team, including Clara and Frank, were captured and arrested. James, Marcus, and several other team members managed to escape capture, but now their situation has become extremely dangerous. They realized they had a traitor who was feeding information to the FBI. James was furious and at the same time determined to save his comrades and take revenge on the traitor. The first step was to find out who exactly betrayed them. Marcus used his hacking skills to break into FBI databases and gain access to their internal investigations. He discovered that an agent infiltrated into their organization had been operating undercover for several months. This discovery came as a real shock to James. The next step was to develop a plan to free the captured team members. James and Marcus knew that the FBI would use them to obtain information and try to lure out the remaining gang members. Therefore, the liberation operation had to be perfectly planned. Marcus developed a complex plan that involved hacking the security systems of the prison where Clara and Frank were being held and creating diversions throughout the city. James contacted Lin Zhang, who offered to help his men carry out this plan. The night of the operation arrived. James and his team, including Lin Zhang's men, infiltrated the prison grounds under the guise of a repair crew. Marcus remotely hacked the security systems, disabling the cameras and alarms for several minutes. The team began to act quickly and smoothly, making their way to Clara and Frank's cells. However, the FBI was already anticipating a possible escape attempt and tightened security measures. An intense fight began. James's team used smoke grenades and diversions to buy time. They reached the cells and freed Clara and Frank, but their escape route was blocked. Marcus, monitoring the situation remotely, created false alarms in other parts of the city to divert police attention. This gave the team enough time to break through the security and get out. They fled to a pre-prepared shelter outside the city. However, their problems did not end there. The FBI knew that James and his team would not stop until they found the traitor and took revenge. The real hunt had begun, and James knew they had to act quickly and decisively. Using information obtained by Marcus, they began to track down the agent who betrayed them. This was a man they trusted, and this betrayal became a personal matter for them. Having found the traitor, James decided to use him as leverage to obtain information and a further plan of action. James's plan was simple. Use the traitor to mislead the FBI and create false leads that would allow them to escape prosecution and start a new life. Marcus has developed a complex system of false data and routes that will confuse their enemies. Realizing that their situation remained extremely dangerous, James and his team began preparing for a major operation that would be their final blow before disappearing. They decided to rob one of the largest banks in the world in order to provide themselves with funds for a new life and at the same time deal a serious blow to their pursuers. After the successful release of Clara and Frank, James Harrington realized that now not only law enforcement agencies, but also numerous enemies from the criminal world are eager for his death. His daring robberies and successes made him a target for rivals and those who lost because of his actions. He understood that now every mistake could be fatal. James decided that the time had come to strike decisively against his enemies and create an even more powerful defense. Together with Marcus and the remaining loyal members of the team, He began to develop a plan that would allow them to destroy the main threats and at the same time gain the funds for a new life. Marcus discovered that major crime bosses were meeting in Moscow to discuss their actions against James. This meeting was an excellent opportunity for James to strike unexpectedly and eliminate several of his enemies at once. The plan was ambitious and risky, but it was precisely such operations that always attracted James. The plan was that during the meeting, Marcus would hack the building's security systems and create chaos, while James and his team would sneak in and eliminate the leaders of the criminal gangs. They prepared thoroughly, studying every aspect of the security system and developing several contingency scenarios. On the night of the operation, James and his team infiltrated Moscow under the guise of service personnel. Marcus remotely hacked the security systems, disabling the cameras and alarms for several minutes. James and his team sprang into action, quickly and silently making their way to the meeting point. When they got inside, a real fight began. The security of the leaders of criminal groups turned out to be well prepared, and James realized that the situation was getting out of control. He quickly adapted to the new conditions, using smoke grenades and diversionary maneuvers to buy time. Marcus, observing the situation through hacked cameras, directed the team's actions and created false leads to confuse the guards. James managed to eliminate several key enemies, but the situation remained critical. Security began to tighten the ring around them, and the team found themselves trapped. Realizing that he needed to act quickly, James decided to activate his last backup plan. They used explosive devices to blast an escape route and began retreating through a system of underground tunnels that they had prepared in advance. Having reached the surface, the team hid in an abandoned building on the outskirts of Moscow. The operation bore fruit. Many of James's enemies were eliminated, but they now became even more of a target for his remaining enemies and law enforcement. James understood that he urgently needed to hide and change his strategy. He decided to temporarily hide and use the funds he obtained to create a new life. Marcus continued to work on improving security systems and developing new technologies for camouflage and protection. James knew that new challenges lay ahead, but he was ready for them. Meanwhile, rumors about the daring operation in Moscow spread throughout the world. James's enemies became even more persistent in their attempts to find him, and he realized that his every move would now be carefully monitored. James decided to use his resources and connections to create false leads and divert attention. He developed several false routes and scenarios to confuse his pursuers and buy time for his team. Each new day brought new challenges and opportunities, and James was ready to face them with confidence and determination. His story continued, and even more grandiose and dangerous adventures awaited him. James Harrington remained the elusive mastermind of the criminal world, ready to overcome any obstacles and prove that he was invincible. After a daring operation in Moscow, James Harrington knew that his enemies would stop at nothing to finish him off. Despite enhanced security measures, he felt his team was in constant danger. But it was at this moment that the most serious threat overtook him. One day, while James and his team were in their hideout in Mexico, several coordinated attacks occurred at once. His enemies decided it was time to strike the decisive blow. During the day, James suffered several assassination attempts, each of which was carefully planned and aimed at eliminating him. The first attempt occurred early in the morning. James was in his office when the explosion occurred. One of the cars parked near his hideout exploded, sending shrapnel and flames in all directions. James managed to take cover but was seriously injured by shrapnel. The team immediately evacuated him to safety, but that was only the beginning. The enemies continued to advance, launching a series of attacks throughout the city. One of them was aimed at Marcus, who narrowly escaped death when his apartment was fired upon. Clara and Frank were also attacked, but managed to fight back and take cover. James was seriously injured and required immediate medical attention. His team understood that it was no longer possible to remain in Mexico. They decided to urgently leave the country and find a new shelter where they could recover and regroup. Marcus used all his hacking skills to find a safe escape route. They decided to head to one of the secret bunkers located in the mountainous regions of Colombia. This bunker was built several years ago and remained unknown to James's enemies. The journey was dangerous and stressful. The enemies continued to pursue them, but the team used all their knowledge and resources to avoid collisions and traps. James, despite his injuries, remained strong and determined, continuing to lead his team even in the most difficult moments. Finally, they reached the bunker. This shelter was equipped with everything necessary for a long stay and recovery. James immediately received medical attention and the team began planning their next steps. While James recovered, Marcus and the rest of the team worked to strengthen security systems and develop new plans. They understood that the enemies would not retreat, and they needed to be prepared for any surprises. Meanwhile, rumors of assassination attempts on James and his injuries spread throughout the world. His enemies thought they had dealt him a serious blow, but they had no idea that James was already planning his response. Having recovered from his injuries, James decided to strike a decisive blow against his enemies. He assembled a team and began to develop a plan for the operation that was to be his greatest victory. They were going to eliminate the main leaders of the criminal groups who organized the assassinations, and at the same time carry out a major heist that would secure their future. The operation began with careful preparation. Marcus hacked the security systems and collected all the necessary information about the location and plans of the enemies. James and his team developed several scenarios to be prepared for any contingency. The day of the operation arrived. James, despite his injuries, personally led the team. They entered the building where the meeting of leaders of criminal groups was taking place and began to act. Using smoke grenades and diversionary maneuvers, they quickly and silently made their way to the main hall. When they burst inside, a fierce battle began. James and his team fought with the guards, eliminating the faction leaders one by one. Marcus monitored the situation remotely, directing the team's actions and creating false signals for the police. After successfully eliminating the main enemies, James and his team headed to the location where the loot was stored. They quickly collected money and jewelry and began to retreat. The operation was successful, and the team disappeared into a previously prepared shelter. Returning to their bunker, James and his team began to evaluate the results. Despite all the difficulties and dangers, they were able to inflict a serious blow on their enemies and provide themselves with the means for a new life. James knew that their fight was not over yet, but now they were ready for any challenge. Each new day brought new opportunities and challenges, and James was ready to take them on with confidence and determination. His story continued, and even more grandiose and dangerous adventures awaited him. James Harrington remained the elusive mastermind of the criminal world, ready to overcome any obstacles and prove that he was invincible. Despite the successful operation and the elimination of the main enemies, James Harrington understood that their pursuers would not retreat. The enemies became even more persistent, and the FBI continued its search with redoubled energy. James and his team knew that every new step had to be extremely careful and carefully planned. After months of hiding and planning, James decided it was time for a new operation. They were going to rob one of the largest banks in Miami, where millions of dollars in jewelry were kept. The plan was daring and complex, but the team was confident in their abilities. Marcus hacked the bank's security system to gain access to the building's plans and security schedule. Clara and Frank went undercover to Miami to personally inspect the bank and assess possible entry points. James, as always, led the operation, checking every step and preparing the team for the task ahead. The day of the operation arrived. The team entered the bank under the guise of service personnel, using forged documents and hacking equipment. They quickly disabled the security systems and began collecting money and jewelry. However, this time they did not know that the FBI was already ready for their actions. The FBI received information from the embedded agent and prepared a trap. When James's team entered the vault, the bank's security system was suddenly activated, and the building was instantly surrounded by special forces. Panic set in, and the team realized they were ambushed. James tried to coordinate a retreat, but their escape routes were blocked. Clara and Frank were trapped in one of the corridors, where they were captured by FBI agents. Marcus, while remote, attempted to hack into the building's control system to create a diversion but was blocked by an FBI countermeasure. James and the remaining team members tried to break through the security, but the forces were unequal. They fought with all their might, but eventually found themselves surrounded and forced to surrender. All of them were arrested and taken to a special FBI facility for interrogation. In prison, James and his team were isolated, interrogated and tortured, trying to find out information about other operations and hideouts. James, despite the pressure, remained cool and did not reveal any information, realizing that his every move was being monitored. However, while in prison, James began to develop a new plan. He knew that he had faithful people on the outside ready to help. Marcus, despite his arrest, continued to maintain contact with the outside world through secret channels. James used his skills and knowledge to establish contact with Lin Zhang and other allies who were willing to help organize the escape. He knew he had to act quickly and decisively to get out of prison and save his team. At night, when security was weakened, the escape operation began. Marcus remotely hacked the prison security system, creating distracting signals and opening an escape route. Lin Zhang and his men entered using explosive devices and smoke grenades. James and his team, despite all the difficulties and injuries, were able to get out of the cells and join their saviors. A fierce battle ensued with the guards, but thanks to coordinated actions and outside support, they managed to break through to the exit and escape. Returning to safety, James and his team began to recover and plan their next steps. They knew that the FBI and their enemies would continue to hunt, but now they had an even more powerful motivation to fight. James Harrington understood that their story was not over yet. Despite all the difficulties and dangers, they were ready to accept new challenges and continue their activities. His legend continued to grow, and each new day brought new opportunities and challenges. James remained an elusive and brilliant criminal, ready to overcome any obstacles and prove that he was invincible. After a daring escape from prison, James Harrington and his team hid in one of the safest shelters prepared in advance. But despite the victory, James felt that his health was beginning to seriously fail. Constant tension, injuries, and stress took their toll. He began to experience severe pain and weakness, which gradually intensified. The team, noticing the deterioration of their leader's condition, insisted that he consult a doctor. James was taken to a secret clinic where he was given a terrible diagnosis, an incurable disease that was rapidly progressing. The doctors made it clear that he had very little time left. James, realizing the inevitable, decided it was time to end his criminal career and secure the future of his team. He gathered all his associates and gave his final orders. He instructed Marcus to use the remaining funds and resources to ensure the safe escape of the team members from America. The team acted quickly and harmoniously. Marcus hacked security systems and created fake documents for all team members. Clara and Frank, along with the others, began to leave the country along pre-prepared routes. They managed to leave America and start a new life in different parts of the world, under new names and with new documents. Each of them began to settle in a new place, far from their previous life. Clara became a successful businesswoman in Europe. Frank opened a small restaurant in Asia, and Marcus continued his activities in the cybersecurity field, using his knowledge to work legally. James, who remained in his hideout, watched as his team successfully escaped their pursuers and began a new life. He felt satisfied that he was able to secure their future and save them from prison and death. Despite his illness, he remained strong and determined to the end. In the last days of his life, James left a note expressing his gratitude and appreciation to everyone who had been with him during these years. He asked the team to continue to live, remember his covenants, and not forget that they have always been the best. James Harrington died quietly and peacefully, surrounded by his remaining loyal comrades. His death marked the end of an era in the world of crime, but his legend lived on. Stories about his daring robberies and elusiveness became true myths, told in criminal circles around the world. The team, continuing their new life, always kept James's memory alive. They knew that thanks to his leadership and genius, they were able to survive and start over. His legacy lived on in their hearts, inspiring them to new achievements and reminding them that even in the darkest world, light can be found. James Harrington's story may have ended, but his influence and lessons lived on in those who knew him and were around him. He will forever remain a legend, an example of an elusive genius and leader who was able to challenge the whole world and emerge victorious, even in the face of an inevitable end. Second story of the criminal. The hero's childhood began in a small town where life flowed slowly and measuredly. From an early age, he was surrounded by poverty, but he was always distinguished by his intelligence and inquisitiveness. Despite his humble circumstances, Jason Morton often spent his time reading books he found in the old bookstore on the street corner. At the age of 8, he came across a book about famous criminals, which made a huge impression on him. Stories of people who went beyond the law and became legends captured his imagination. He began to become interested in psychology and strategy, studying how these individuals were able to achieve such heights, despite all the obstacles. At school, he was always lonely, often becoming the object of ridicule and bullying from his classmates. But this did not break his spirit. Instead, he began to develop his own plans and strategies to protect himself and gain respect. He understood that strength lies not only in physical strength but also in intelligence and cunning. As a teenager, he began to gather around himself children like him, misunderstood and rejected by society. Together, they formed a small group that engaged in petty crimes to attract attention and make money. Their actions became more and more daring and thoughtful, which attracted the attention of local authorities. Thus, his childhood was the beginning of a path that led him to create the most dangerous gang in America. From an early age, he understood that in order to achieve his goals, he would have to walk on thin ice, balancing between law and crime. But this only fueled his interest and ambitions. As a teenager, Jason Morton began looking for ways to make money and gain authority. He realized that his future depended on his ability to act quickly and decisively. Together with several friends, he began to engage in petty thefts and robberies. At first, local stores and warehouses became their victims, but over time their goals became more and more ambitious. Each new operation was carefully planned. Jason studied every material available to him on criminal strategy and tactics, developing his skills and knowledge. He understood that success depended on detailed preparation and the ability to predict the enemy's actions. At school, Jason also used his skills, avoiding punishment and cleverly manipulating teachers and classmates. He became known for his composure and ability to get away with the most difficult situations. This quality helped him gain respect among his peers, who saw him as a leader. Gradually, his group grew. New members joined them, each bringing their own unique abilities and skills. Jason managed his team skillfully, distributing responsibilities and maintaining discipline. He understood that success depended on coordinated work and mutual trust. By the age of 18, Jason Morton and his gang had become known far beyond their hometown. Their daring raids and cunning schemes attracted the attention of the police, but Jason was always one step ahead. He knew that it was necessary to constantly change tactics and be prepared for any surprises. Inspired by the success, Jason decided to expand his activities. He began to establish contacts with other criminal groups and influential figures in the criminal world. His ambitions grew, and he realized that to achieve his goals he would have to play big. Thus began Jason Morton's path to creating the most dangerous gang in America. His childhood and youth hardened him, turning him into a cold-blooded and calculating leader, ready to do anything for power and money. Over time, Jason Morton became not only the leader of his gang, but also a respected figure in the criminal world. His ability to evade the police and find new ways to enrich himself attracted the attention of larger criminal groups. Jason knew that to continue to grow, he needed allies and resources. At the age of 20, he moved to New York, a city where life was in full swing and the possibilities seemed endless. Here he began to build his empire, making deals with local gangs and establishing control over various areas of the city. Jason had a natural gift of persuasion, and he was able to negotiate even with the most brutal criminal leaders. Jason planned each new case with special care. He knew that success depended on a detailed analysis of the situation and the ability to anticipate possible risks. He developed a complex network of informants who helped him obtain information about the activities of the police and competitors. One of Jason's first major successes in New York was a raid on a weapons warehouse that belonged to one of the most powerful gangs in the city. This operation showed everyone that Jason Morton was not just an ambitious young criminal, but also a serious gambler, willing to take risks for big wins. Over time, his gang grew, becoming more organized and professional. Jason implemented strict rules and discipline that allowed his team to operate cohesively and efficiently. He understood that this was the only way to achieve real success and retain power. Jason also began investing money in legitimate businesses, using them as a front for his criminal operations. This helped him hide his income and launder money, which made the task of the police even more difficult. His influence extended not only to the criminal world, but also to the legal economy of the city. However, as power and wealth grew, so did the dangers. Jason realized that he had many enemies who were willing to do anything to overthrow him. He was constantly on the alert, ready for new challenges and intrigues. His life became a constant struggle to survive and strengthen his empire. All this time, Jason did not forget about his roots and those who helped him in the early days. He continued to keep in touch with his childhood friends, many of whom became his loyal companions. This helped him maintain inner harmony and reminded him of what he started his journey for. So Jason Morton, step by step, created the most dangerous gang in America, turning from a poor boy into one of the most influential and dangerous people in the country. Over the years, Jason Morton continued to expand his gang, seeking even greater power and influence. Each new year brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth. At 30, Jason already controlled most of New York's criminal underworld. His gang numbered hundreds of members, each of whom was loyal to his leader and ready to carry out his every instruction. Jason personally trained new recruits, instilling his principles and strategies into them. Each new achievement of Jason became an example for his followers. He skillfully manipulated power, concluding lucrative deals and establishing connections with influential figures both in the criminal world and in legal business. Jason understood that his success depended not only on strength, but also on intelligence, and he constantly developed his skills in management and strategy. Jason began to actively invest in technology and information networks. This allowed him to create complex schemes to launder money and evade police attention. He hired the best hackers and cybersecurity specialists to always be one step ahead of his enemies and competitors. In addition, Jason developed his network of informants. He paid generous sums for information about the activities of the police, competitors, and potential threats. This information allowed him to take preventative measures and eliminate threats before they became real problems. Every year, his influence spread wider and wider. Jason established control over the drug trade, weapons, and contraband in several major U.S. cities. His gang became international, and he began to establish connections with criminal groups in other countries. This allowed him to reach a new level and increase his income significantly. However, as his power grew, so did the dangers. Jason understood that it was not easy to stay at the top of the criminal world, and his enemies would try to overthrow him by any means. He strengthened security measures, creating an elite guard consisting of the most reliable and trusted people. His life became a continuous series of strategic decisions and risky operations. Jason never lost his vigilance, constantly analyzing the situation and predicting the possible moves of his enemies. He knew that any mistake could cost him everything he had achieved. So, year after year, Jason Morton expanded his gang, turning it into the most dangerous and influential criminal organization in America. His path was filled with dangers and challenges, but he always emerged victorious, thanks to his intelligence, charisma, and unyielding will to power. By the age of 40, Jason Morton had become a legend in the criminal world. His name inspired fear and respect, and his gang controlled significant territories not only in the United States but also abroad. Jason knew how to effectively manage his organization, thanks to which his empire continued to grow and strengthen. He developed a complex hierarchical structure, where each gang member had his own duties and accountability. This allowed Jason to quickly respond to any threats and maintain control over the situation. He also implemented a system of rewards and punishments to motivate his men and maintain a high level of discipline. Jason paid special attention to safety. He built a network of secret shelters and safe houses where he could hide in case of danger. His personal guard consisted of former military and special forces soldiers who were ready to protect him at the cost of their own lives. These measures allowed him to feel protected and confident in his safety. One day, Jason decided to carry out the biggest operation of his career. He learned about a large shipment of drugs that was supposed to pass through New York and decided to seize it in order not only to make a huge profit, but also to strike a blow against his competitors. The operation was carefully planned. He gathered the best forces of his gang, developed complex tactics, and prepared all the necessary resources. The raid was successful. Jason and his men captured a shipment of drugs and neutralized their competitors. This operation strengthened his position and brought in huge profits, which he invested in the further expansion of his empire. His influence grew, and with it, the number of enemies. With each new success, Jason became more and more cautious. He understood that at the top of the criminal world, any mistake could be fatal. His life became a series of intrigues, betrayals, and strategic moves. He learned to predict the actions of his enemies and was always one step ahead. However, Jason was aware that his power rested on a delicate balance. He understood that he could not rest on his laurels and needed to constantly develop. He began to actively implement new technologies, using artificial intelligence to analyze data and develop strategies. This allowed him to manage his empire even more effectively and anticipate possible threats. Ultimately, Jason Morton became not just a gang leader but a true master of his craft. His path to power was long and difficult, but he always remained true to his principles and goals. His life became an example for many who aspired to power and money, and he proved that even in the world of crime, success can be achieved if you act smartly and decisively. At 50 years old, Jason Morton was at the peak of his criminal career. His gang, known as the Black Crows, had influence at all levels of society, from petty street criminals to corrupt politicians and businessmen. Jason has become a real puppeteer, skillfully pulling the strings of power. He surrounded himself with the most reliable and loyal people, many of whom were with him from the very beginning. Each of his closest associates was responsible for a certain sector of criminal activity: drugs, weapons, smuggling, money laundering. This allowed Jason to delegate authority and focus on strategic management and expansion of his empire. Jason also actively used his legitimate businesses to cover up criminal operations. He owned a chain of restaurants, nightclubs, and car washes that served as a front for money laundering and hiding illegal proceeds. This made his operations virtually invulnerable to law enforcement, who could not prove his involvement in the crimes. However, despite all the precautions, Jason's enemies did not sleep. Rival gangs made attempts on his life several times, but each time he emerged victorious. He was always one step ahead, anticipating their moves and developing countermeasures. Jason understood that in the world of crime one could not relax for a second and was always prepared for any surprises. One day, Jason learned that one of his closest associates, whom he trusted as himself, turned out to be a traitor. This man worked for the FBI, passing on information about gang activities. This was a serious blow to Jason, but he did not let his emotions get the better of him. Instead, he carefully planned an operation to identify and neutralize the traitor. When the traitor was exposed, Jason carried out a show execution to remind everyone that betrayal does not go unpunished. This event further strengthened his authority among the gang members and instilled fear in those who might consider betrayal. Meanwhile, Jason continued to expand his influence. He established connections with international criminal organizations, which allowed him to reach a new level. Now, his operations covered not only America, but also Europe, Asia, and Latin America. This brought him huge profits and made him one of the most powerful people in the world of crime. However, as power grew, so did the dangers. Jason understood that his every move was carefully monitored not only by his competitors, but also by law enforcement agencies around the world. He stepped up his security measures, creating a network of false leads and false identities to confuse his enemies and avoid arrest. Jason Morton's life has become a continuous struggle to survive and strengthen his empire. He never forgot his roots and those who helped him on his way to the top. His gang, the Black Crows, continued to grow and strengthen, and Jason himself remained a cool and prudent leader, ready to do anything to maintain his power. When Jason turned 60, his influence and power reached unprecedented heights. He became not just a criminal leader, but also a shadow ruler, dictating his terms in various areas of life. Despite his age, Jason retained the sharp mind and iron will that helped him stay on top. His organization, Black Crows, has acquired an international scope. Jason skillfully built relationships with criminal syndicates in different countries, creating a powerful network through which drugs, weapons, and other illegal goods passed. He used high technology to coordinate his operations, implementing encryption and tracking systems that made his activities virtually invisible to authorities. Jason also understood the importance of legalizing part of his income. He continued to invest in various businesses, from hospitality to real estate. This not only brought him a stable income, but also allowed him to launder huge amounts of money. His business empire became increasingly legal, although the criminal component remained the main one. In one of the major cities of Europe, Jason founded a new center of his activities. This city became his second base from where he managed his international operations. He acquired a residence equipped with the latest security technology and created an impenetrable security ring around himself. Despite all the precautions, Jason's enemies continued to look for ways to overthrow him. Rival gangs and law enforcement agencies around the world united in efforts to stop him. There were attempts on his life several times, but each time Jason emerged victorious thanks to his skills and preparedness. One of the most serious tests for Jason was the betrayal of one of the high-ranking members of his organization. This man passed on information to competitors, which led to a number of failures in the Black Raven's operations. Jason decided to act immediately and eliminated the traitor, carrying out another show execution. This again strengthened his authority and showed everyone that betrayal would not go unpunished. Jason also began to engage in charity work, donating large sums to various social programs and foundations. This helped him create a positive image in the eyes of society and divert attention from his criminal activities. Many saw him as a benefactor, unaware of his true nature. Over the years, Jason began to think about his heritage. He realized that he would not last forever and began to prepare a replacement. He trained the most promising members of his gang, passing on his knowledge and experience to them. Jason wanted to make sure that the Black Crows would continue to exist after his departure. There was no room for weakness or hesitation in his life. Jason Morton continued to be a cool and calculating leader who was willing to do anything to preserve his empire. His story is not over yet, and new challenges and victories await him. One day, Jason Morton decided that it was time to take another bold step to strengthen his influence and increase his wealth. He planned a robbery that would become iconic and memorable for a long time. The target was the home of a millionaire, known for his connections with the highest strata of society and the enormous wealth stored in his mansion. This millionaire, Robert Whitmore, lived in a luxurious estate on the outskirts of the city. His house was equipped with the most advanced security systems, making it virtually impenetrable. However, for Jason, such challenges only fueled his passion and desire to prove to everyone that nothing is impossible for the Black Ravens. Jason began to carefully plan the operation. He assembled his team of the best specialists, burglars, hackers, surveillance experts, and militants. Each team member was selected for their unique skills and tested in action. Jason developed a plan, studying every detail of the mansion, every security camera, every shift of security. The first step was reconnaissance. For several weeks, Jason's team collected information about the daily routine of Robert Whitmore and his guards. They hacked the video surveillance systems installed around the mansion and studied all possible entry points. Jason's hackers found vulnerabilities in the home security system and developed a plan to neutralize them. The day of the robbery arrived. Jason and his team were ready. They chose a moment when Whitmore had to leave for an important meeting and security was on shift. This gave them several hours to carry out the operation. On the night of the robbery, Jason's team entered the estate, disarming surveillance cameras and alarm systems. They moved quickly and silently, following a pre-developed plan. The burglars worked flawlessly, opening doors and safes as if by magic. When they reached the main safe, the hackers began their work. They hacked the complex security system, opening access to the untold riches stored inside. Gold, jewelry, cash. All this became their prey. Meanwhile, Jason remained alert, coordinating his team's efforts and keeping an eye on the clock. He knew they had a limited amount of time before security noticed the break-in and raised the alarm. The team completed the robbery and left the house as quickly and silently as they entered it. By the time security discovered the break-in, it was already too late. Jason and his men were far away and the loot was safely hidden. This robbery was another triumph for the Black Ravens and Jason Morton personally. It strengthened his authority and showed everyone that even the most protected facilities could not resist his genius and the skill of his team. Jason used part of the loot for further investment and expansion of his empire, and distributed the rest among his people, rewarding them for a successful operation. He knew that success depended on the loyalty and motivation of his team, and he always looked after his people. So, step by step, Jason continued to build his empire, remaining an invincible leader in the world of crime. His life was filled with risk and adrenaline, but that's what made it so exciting and eventful. Jason Morton's story continued, and new challenges and victories awaited him. After the daring robbery, Robert Whitmore was furious. The loss of so much money and jewelry was not only a financial blow for him, but also a serious blow to his pride and reputation. He understood that the Black Crows had insulted him, and he was not going to let it go unpunished. Robert hired the best hitmen to take revenge on Jason Morton and his gang. These mercenaries were known for their ruthlessness and professionalism, and they had one mission: to destroy the Black Ravens at any cost. Robert gave them carte blanche, providing all the necessary resources and information. Meanwhile, Jason sensed something was brewing. His crime sources told him that Whitmore had hired hitmen. Jason knew that this was inevitable and that he must prepare for a possible attack. The first thing Jason did was increase security measures. He moved his base to a new, more secure location and created a system of false shelters to confuse the mercenaries. He also strengthened his security by adding new people and upgrading equipment. Jason decided to launch a preemptive strike. He assembled a team of his most trusted people and began planning an operation to eliminate the threat. Using his extensive connections and information, he discovered the location of the mercenaries and their plans. One day, Jason and his team decided to take action. They infiltrated a mercenary base located in an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. Jason knew that surprise and speed would be their main advantage. They acted quickly and decisively, eliminating the mercenaries one by one. The mercenaries turned out to be strong opponents, but Jason's team was better prepared and organized. As a result of a fierce firefight, most of the killers were neutralized. Jason personally encountered the leader of the mercenaries, an experienced and brutal fighter. Their fight was intense and evenly matched, but in the end, Jason gained the upper hand, showing his superiority. Having destroyed the main threat, Jason sent Whitmore a message. Attempts to take revenge on him and his gang would have serious consequences. He made it clear that the Black Crows not only know how to attack, but also defend, and that no one can touch them with impunity. Robert Whitmore, realizing the scale of his losses and the power of Jason, was forced to admit defeat. He realized that the fight against the Black Crows would only result in great losses and risk to his life. Jason, realizing that the threat had temporarily passed, continued to strengthen his empire. He knew that his enemies would not give him peace and that he needed to be prepared for new challenges. His life continued in constant readiness to fight, but this only made him stronger and more determined. The story of Jason Morton and his gang, the Black Crows, continued to evolve, filled with new challenges, victories, and defeats. Every new day brought new challenges, but Jason was always ready for them, knowing that his intelligence and strength would help him survive and win. After the defeat of the mercenaries, Jason Morton felt confident again, but he knew that his enemies were not asleep. His reputation and influence grew, and with them the envy and hatred of him grew. However, Jason was ready for anything. His life became a series of strategic maneuvers and a constant struggle for survival. One day he received news that his old enemy, a former ally, a traitor who had once tried to frame him, had shown up in Los Angeles and began to gather his army to overthrow Jason. This man, Victor Raven, was no less ambitious and cruel than Jason himself. They once worked together, but Victor's betrayal left a deep mark on Jason's soul. Jason knew Victor would act quickly and decisively. He understood that he needed to get ahead of the enemy and launch a preemptive strike. Jason gathered his team and began to develop a plan. He decided to carry out an operation to destroy Victor's army before it reached its full strength. Jason sent several of his best men to Los Angeles to conduct reconnaissance. They found out that Victor was gathering his people in an abandoned factory, where they were training and preparing for the attack. Jason decided to act immediately. At night, Jason's team entered the factory. They moved silently and secretly, neutralizing the guards and planting explosive devices around the perimeter. When everything was ready, Jason gave the signal to begin the operation. The factory exploded with a roar that shook the surrounding area. Panic broke out inside, and Victor's trapped men were disoriented. Jason and his team rushed in using the element of surprise. A fierce battle ensued, but the preparation and determination of the Black Ravens did their job. Jason came face to face with Victor. This was a meeting that both had been waiting for a long time. Victor was ready to fight, and their fight was intense and merciless. Each of them knew the other's weaknesses, and this made the battle even more brutal. Finally, Jason gained the upper hand. He did not kill Victor right away, preferring to listen to his last words. Victor, despite the defeat, was proud and did not ask for mercy. Jason looked at him and realized that in a way, they were both two sides of the same coin. However, betrayal could not go unpunished. Jason ended the fight, leaving Victor to die in the factory that became his grave. Returning to his base, Jason felt that he had taken another step towards strengthening his power. However, he understood that the fight would never end. His enemies will appear again and again, and he needs to be ready for any challenge. After defeating Victor, Jason Morton realized that his empire had become too large to be limited to just the United States. He decided to expand his operations abroad, and his next target was one of Mexico's most powerful and wealthy drug lords, Raul Gutierrez. Gutierrez controlled vast territories and had an entire army of mercenaries under his command, which made him a serious threat and at the same time a desirable target for Jason. Jason carefully prepared for this operation. He understood that this would not be just a robbery, but a real war with one of the most dangerous people in the world. His plan was to first weaken Gutierrez's position and then strike a decisive blow. The first step was reconnaissance. Jason sent his best men to Mexico to gather information about Gutierrez's location and activities. They discovered that the drug lord was conducting his operations from a luxurious estate surrounded by high walls and armed guards. Jason understood that the attack on this estate would have to be lightning fast and carefully planned. He started by undermining Gutierrez's infrastructure. Jason's hackers broke into his bank accounts, transferring significant amounts to fictitious accounts, causing panic among his people. Jason then organized several raids on drug and weapons warehouses, which seriously undermined the drug lord's resources. With Gutierrez's position weakened, Jason decided to strike the decisive blow. He assembled his team, which included the best fighters, hackers, and strategists. They headed to Mexico, ready for the biggest operation of their careers. At night, Jason's team entered the Gutierrez estate. They moved quickly and silently, neutralizing the guards and planting explosive devices around the perimeter. Jason knew that surprise and coordination would be their greatest allies. When everything was ready, Jason gave the signal to begin the attack. Explosions went off throughout the estate, causing chaos and panic. Jason's team rushed inside, eliminating resistance and moving towards the central building where Gutierrez was located. A fierce firefight ensued. Gutierrez's security offered strong resistance, but the skill and determination of Jason's team did their job. They moved forward, destroying everything in their path. Jason eventually confronted Gutierrez in person in his office. Raul Gutierrez turned out to be a strong and experienced fighter, but Jason, thanks to his experience and composure, managed to gain the upper hand. He left Gutierrez to die in his own home, which was reduced to rubble. A successful operation against one of the most powerful drug lords in the world strengthened the reputation of Jason and his gang. They became known not only in the United States but also abroad as elusive and ruthless criminals, ready to do anything to achieve their goals. Jason used the captured resources and connections to further expand his empire. His influence grew, and so did the risks. But Jason was ready for any challenge. He knew that new challenges lay ahead, and every day was a new battle for survival and power. After the defeat of Raul Gutierrez, Jason Morton and his Black Crows became a legend in the criminal world. However, despite his success, Jason realized that he was now in the crosshairs of many enemies, including the remaining associates of Gutierrez and other criminal cartels who saw him as a threat. One of the first to take revenge on Jason was Alvaro Santos, Gutierrez's former deputy. Santos quickly regained his position, uniting Gutierrez's remaining men and resources under his command. He vowed to destroy Jason and regain his lost influence. Jason, having learned about Santos's plans, began to act proactively. He decided to use a strategy he had successfully used before: weaken the enemy from within before delivering the decisive blow. He sent his best agents to infiltrate Santos's men and sow distrust and discord there. At the same time, Jason began to develop a plan to eliminate key figures around Santos. He organized several targeted strikes aimed at eliminating Santos's closest associates. These strikes were carried out with surgical precision, and each dealt a serious blow to Santos's command structure. Alvaro, realizing that his people were dying one after another, began to suspect betrayal among his own. This led to internal conflicts and undermined his authority. Jason knew time was on his side and continued to increase the pressure. Finally, the moment came for the decisive attack. Jason and his team gathered all their forces for a large-scale strike on the main base of Santos. They knew that it would be a difficult and dangerous operation, but they were prepared for anything. On the night of the attack, the Black Ravens infiltrated Santos territory using elaborate tactics. Explosions and gunfire once again filled the night with noise. Jason personally led the operation, coordinating the actions of his team and taking part in the fighting. The battle was fierce. Santos's men, realizing this was their last chance, fought fiercely. But the Black Crows were better prepared and organized. They gradually moved forward, eliminating resistance. Eventually, Jason and several of his closest associates reached the central building where Santos was located. The final fight began inside. Santos, realizing the inevitability of his defeat, decided to fight to the end. His last attempt to stop Jason was daring but futile. Jason, showing his usual coolness and determination, defeated Santos. He understood that the destruction of Santos would be another step towards strengthening his power and influence. After the elimination of Alvaro Santos, Jason again strengthened his position. His gang became even more powerful, and his reputation even more fearsome. But he understood that his path would never be easy. New challenges and trials lay ahead of him, and he was ready for them. After the elimination of Alvaro Santos, Jason Morton and his Black Crows became the undisputed leaders in the criminal world. Jason now focuses on strengthening his empire and preventing new threats. However, his successes and growing influence attracted the attention of not only competitors, but also international law enforcement agencies. Jason knew he needed to diversify his sources of income and strengthen his position internationally. He began to establish connections with influential figures in Europe and Asia, creating a global network of criminal operations. This allowed him to increase his income and ensure the security of his empire. One of Jason's first international operations was to establish a base in Eastern Europe. The region was known for its instability and high levels of corruption, making it an ideal place for criminal enterprises to expand. Jason sent his best people to establish contacts and create infrastructure. Meanwhile, in the USA, Jason continued to strengthen his position. He invested heavily in legitimate businesses, using them as fronts for his criminal operations. This allowed him to hide his income and avoid the attention of law enforcement agencies. His legitimate businesses included a chain of hotels, clubs, and transportation companies, ensuring a steady flow of money and expanding his influence. One day, Jason learned about a major drug smuggling operation that one of his competitors was preparing in South America. This operation could seriously undermine his position and reduce his income. Jason decided to act quickly and decisively. He sent his men to South America with the task of thwarting his rival's plans and seizing his cargo. Jason's team acted quickly and efficiently. They entered the warehouse where the cargo was stored and caused sabotage. As a result of the operation, the cargo was destroyed, and the competitor suffered serious losses. This not only strengthened Jason's position, but also showed all his enemies that the Black Crows were always one step ahead. In response to the successful operations, Jason decided to beef up his security and improve his security measures. He understood that his enemies would try to take revenge and was prepared for any attacks. Jason created a network of safe houses and shelters where he could hide in case of danger. He also hired the best security experts and equipped his men with modern weapons and technology. Over time, Jason began to focus more on developing his organization and training new recruits. He understood that his success depended on the dedication and professionalism of his team. Jason personally trained his people, passing on his knowledge and experience. This allowed him to create a strong and united team, ready for any challenge. Each new success of Jason strengthened his reputation and influence. His life was filled with dangers and challenges, but that is what made it exciting and rich. Jason knew that new challenges and victories lay ahead of him, and he was ready to accept them all. The story of Jason Morton and his Black Ravens continued to evolve, filled with new intrigues, battles, and triumphs. A few months after a successful operation in South America, Jason Morton realized that he needed to consolidate his influence in Mexico. The influence of the Black Ravens grew, but their competitors did not give up, and each new victory brought new threats. Jason decided that the next step would be to eliminate a key player in the Mexican drug market, Miguel Alvarez, a drug lord who controlled large areas of northern Mexico. Miguel was known for his brutality and influence in criminal circles, which made him a difficult and dangerous target. Jason assembled his team to develop an operation plan. He knew that to successfully complete a task, he had to act quickly and decisively, using both strength and cunning. Intelligence revealed that Alvarez often spent time at his luxury ranch, which was surrounded by guards and technologically advanced security systems. The first stage of the plan was to penetrate Alvarez's circle. Jason introduced several of his agents who began to collect information and build trusting relationships with Alvarez's people. This made it possible to learn details about the daily routine, security system, and weak points in the ranch's defenses. Jason then decided to take an unconventional approach. Instead of a direct attack, he organized a series of diversionary maneuvers that were supposed to disable a significant part of Alvarez's guards. First, weapons and drug warehouses were attacked, causing panic and disorganization among Alvarez's men. With the ranch's security down, Jason and his team moved on to the next stage. They entered the ranch under cover of darkness, using the latest technology to bypass security systems. The team moved quickly and silently, neutralizing the remaining guards and making their way to the main building. A fierce battle ensued inside the ranch. Alvarez's men fought desperately, but the preparation and determination of the Blacks, the Ravens, did their job. Jason personally led the assault on the main building where Alvarez was located. In the final battle, Jason came face to face with Miguel. Alvarez was a strong and dangerous opponent, but Jason, thanks to his experience and skill, prevailed. After eliminating Alvarez, Jason ordered his men to collect all valuable data and materials that could be used for further operations. Having destroyed one of the most influential drug lords, the Black Crows strengthened their position in Mexico and expanded their influence. However, Jason knew his work didn't end there. Each new success attracted new enemies, and he needed to be constantly on guard. He strengthened security measures, created new shelters, and improved the internal intelligence system. Jason continued to grow his empire by training new recruits and introducing advanced technology. His organization became more powerful and elusive, and each new day brought new opportunities and challenges. The story of Jason Morton and his Black Ravens continued, full of new intrigues, battles, and victories. Sometime after the liquidation of Miguel Alvarez, the influence of Jason Morton and his Black Crows gang in Mexico strengthened significantly. Jason understood that he needed to maintain control over the captured territories and expand his presence in new markets. One of the key steps was establishing contacts with local politicians and law enforcement agencies. Jason used his financial resources and influence to bribe key officials and secure high-level protection for himself. This allowed him to secure his activities and make them less vulnerable to government intervention. However, despite all his efforts, Jason continued to make new enemies. One of them was José Ramirez, an ambitious and brutal drug lord who sought to regain control of his lost territory. Ramirez was well organized and willing to do anything to bring down Jason. Jason, aware of the threat, began to prepare for a possible war. He strengthened the security of his facilities and began to actively monitor Ramirez's actions. At the same time, he continued to develop his legitimate businesses to strengthen the financial position of his empire. Ramirez decided to act quickly and aggressively. He orchestrated a series of attacks on Jason's facilities in an attempt to destabilize his business and cause panic among his people. However, thanks to a well-organized security system and prompt action, most of the attacks were repulsed. Jason decided to strike back. He developed a plan aimed at eliminating key people around Ramirez and undermining his infrastructure. Jason's team began a series of targeted strikes, destroying warehouses with weapons and drugs, as well as eliminating Ramirez's main associates. As a result of these actions, Ramirez's position was seriously weakened. His people began to abandon him, realizing that resistance to the Black Crows was futile. Ramirez was left with virtually no support and was forced to take refuge in his shelter. Jason decided it was time for the finishing blow. He gathered his team and went to storm Ramirez's hideout. The operation was carefully planned and carried out with surgical precision. Jason's team entered the territory, neutralized the guards, and went inside. In the final fight, Jason came face to face with Ramirez. The battle was fierce and merciless. Ramirez, despite his cruelty and experience, could not resist Jason. In the end, Jason was victorious and eliminated the last threat to his influence in the region. After the destruction of Ramirez, Jason finally strengthened his position in Mexico. He continued to develop his businesses and strengthen control over the occupied territories. The influence of the Black Ravens spread far beyond Mexico, and their name became synonymous with fear and respect in the criminal world. However, Jason knew that every new success attracts new enemies. He continued to be alert, preparing for new challenges and trials. The story of Jason Morton and his gang continued, filled with new intrigues, battles, and triumphs, and his empire grew and became stronger every day. After successfully eliminating José Ramirez and strengthening his position in Mexico, Jason Morton decided that his next target should be the elimination of a high-ranking politician who publicly denounced his gang and called for greater measures against organized crime. This politician, Senator Edward Collins, was known for his hard-line anti-crime views and had significant influence in government. Senator Collins became a major problem for the Black Ravens, as his speeches and actions brought their activities to the attention of law enforcement. Jason knew that to maintain and expand his influence, he needed to eliminate this threat. The plan to eliminate Collins was complex and risky. Jason gathered his best people to develop a strategy. They began by observing the senator, studying his daily routine, travel routes, and security systems. The team found that Collins frequently held meetings at his country home, which was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems and was guarded by government security. The first step was to introduce the agent into Collins' circle. Jason chose one of his men who, under the guise of a security officer, gained access to information about the senator's plans and movements. This allowed Jason's team to develop a more detailed plan of attack. The day of the operation arrived. Jason decided to act quickly and decisively to minimize the risks. The team entered Collins's country home under cover of darkness, using fake passes and equipment to hack security systems. When they reached the house, the operation began. Jason's team quickly and quietly neutralized the guards, using non-lethal weapons to avoid noise and attracting attention. Jason personally led the team that was to enter the house and eliminate the senator. They entered Collins's bedroom, where he was sleeping unsuspectingly. Jason, realizing the importance of this moment, acted quickly and ruthlessly. Before Collins realized what had happened, Jason completed the operation. The team quickly and silently left the house, destroying all traces of their presence. They used pre-prepared escape routes to avoid pursuit and attention from law enforcement. The liquidation of Senator Collins was a high-profile event that caused a storm in political circles and society. But for the Black Crows, it was an important victory, which allowed them to continue their activities without interference from anti-crime laws and government actions. Jason understood that such a move would attract attention and new threats, but he was prepared for any consequences. His organization continued to develop, becoming more powerful and elusive. Jason knew that new trials and challenges lay ahead of him, and he was ready to take on them all. The history of the Black Ravens continued to evolve, full of new intrigues, battles, and triumphs. The assassination of Senator Edward Collins was the defining moment for Jason Morton and his gang. The problems that this politician created are a thing of the past, but along with this, the emphasis on security has also increased. Jason knew that his organization was now under close surveillance and every wrong move could cost them everything. Shortly after Collins was eliminated, Jason decided to strengthen his position in the political sphere. He understood that without control over certain aspects of power, his empire would be vulnerable. Influencing politicians and government agencies was the next stage of his strategy. One day, during one of the secret meetings with informants, Jason learned about Deputy Thomas Wilkins, who actively spoke out against corruption and had significant influence in Parliament. Wilkins became a new target, as his actions could seriously interfere with Jason's plans. Jason decided to take a more sophisticated approach. Instead of a direct attack, he devised a plan to discredit Wilkins. A team of hackers hacked into his personal and work computers, finding incriminating material that could ruin his career and reputation. Jason knew that destroying Wilkins's reputation would be much more effective than simply removing him physically. Black Raven's hackers created false documents and correspondence that indicated Wilkins' participation in corruption schemes and illegal transactions. These materials were carefully prepared and handed over to journalists, who quickly picked up the sensation. Public opinion soon changed. Wilkins found himself under a barrage of accusations and investigations. His political career was ruined and he was forced to resign. Jason achieved his goal without shedding a drop of blood. However, this success did not lead to calm. Jason understood that every new step forward leads to new challenges. Internal divisions within his organization began to surface, and he had to spend more and more time maintaining order and discipline. One day, at one of the meetings, Jason decided to purge the ranks of the Black Ravens. He gathered all the key members of the organization and gave an ultimatum. Either they remain loyal and follow his instructions unconditionally, or they will face severe punishment. This was necessary to strengthen his power and prevent betrayal. Several people tried to oppose him, but Jason quickly and decisively suppressed the rebellion. He showed that he was ready to go to any lengths to maintain control. Soon after, the internal conflict subsided, and the organization began to function as a single entity again. Jason continued to build his empire using every means available. He knew that only those who are ready to do anything to achieve their goal remain at the top. His story continued to develop, and each new day brought new challenges and victories. Jason was ready for them, knowing that new challenges and battles awaited him. It's been several months since Jason Morton consolidated his power within the Black Ravens. Despite constant threats and challenges, he skillfully maneuvered through the world of crime using strength, cunning, and strategic thinking. But a new challenge awaited him: the intervention of international security forces. Intelligence informed Jason that a team of international investigators led by Interpol had arrived in the city. Their goal was to expose and destroy his empire. Jason realized that this was a serious threat and began to prepare for the upcoming confrontation. First of all, he strengthened security measures. Additional checks were carried out on all members of the organization to identify possible informants and traitors. Jason also ordered agents to be inserted into the ranks of investigators in order to receive information about the progress of their investigation and plans. The operation to neutralize the investigators began with a series of disinformation maneuvers. Jason and his team created several false leads that led investigators into dead ends. At the same time, the real operations of the Black Ravens continued to generate income and strengthen the influence of the organization. But Jason knew that wasn't enough. He decided to launch a preemptive strike in order to completely confuse the investigators and demoralize them. The Black Ravens hacker team hacked into Interpol systems and gained access to classified information. This allowed Jason to learn the names and locations of key investigators. The operation began one dark, rainy evening. Jason's team, acting silently and coordinatedly, entered the hotel where the investigators were staying. All precautions were taken to avoid unnecessary casualties and not attract the attention of local authorities. Every step was carefully thought out. The investigators were captured one by one, without noise or panic. They were taken to one of Jason's secret hideouts, where they were interrogated. Jason personally supervised the process, trying to obtain as much information as possible about Interpol's plans. Having collected all the necessary data, Jason decided to use it to his advantage. He prepared a series of incriminating materials that would indicate the corruption and incompetence of the investigators. These materials were leaked to the media, causing an international scandal and undermining confidence in the investigation. As a result, investigators were forced to leave the city, and the investigation was suspended. Jason won another victory, showing that even international forces could not break his power. But he knew that this was only a temporary lull. Realizing that his enemies would not let up, Jason continued to strengthen his empire. He expanded his political connections, expanded his legitimate businesses, and introduced new technologies to protect his operations. His influence grew, and so did his confidence in the future. Jason Morton remained adamant and determined, ready for any challenge. He knew that his story was far from over, and new battles and victories awaited him. The Black Crows continued to evolve, becoming an increasingly powerful and elusive force in the world of crime. After the international investigation was suspended, Jason Morton felt confident again. However, he understood that in the world of crime, one could not relax for a minute. New challenges awaited him ahead, and he decided to prepare for them in advance. One of the key steps was the creation of a powerful network of informants and agents around the world. Jason began actively recruiting people in a variety of fields, from law enforcement to financial institutions. This allowed him to receive first-hand information and quickly respond to any threats. At this time, a new threat appeared on the horizon: Alberto Domingo, a famous Mexican drug lord who decided to challenge the Black Crows. Domingo was ambitious and cruel, and his goal was clear: to take control of the territories belonging to Jason and destroy his empire. Jason decided to be proactive. He gathered his best strategists and began to develop a plan to eliminate Domingo. The first step was to find out the weaknesses in his organization. To do this, Jason sent several of his undercover agents into the ranks of Domingo's men. Agents quickly determined that Domingo had a number of exploitable vulnerabilities. One of them was his dependence on certain suppliers of weapons and drugs. Jason decided to block these channels in order to weaken Domingo's position. He started by undermining deals, disrupting supplies, and bribing suppliers to stop doing business with his enemy. Domingo, having lost significant resources, began to lose the trust of his people. At this time, Jason decided to strike the decisive blow. He organized a series of attacks on Domingo's key targets using elements of surprise and tactical maneuvers. His team acted quickly and silently, eliminating resistance and seizing control of important points. The culmination of the operation was the storming of Domingo's residence. Jason personally led this operation, knowing that success depended on his leadership and determination. The assault was fierce, but thanks to preparation and coordination, the Black Crows quickly gained the upper hand. Jason entered Domingo's office where he met him face to face. Domingo tried to resist, but Jason was faster and stronger. In the final decisive battle, Jason gained the upper hand, eliminating another serious threat. After the elimination of Domingo, Jason again strengthened his position. He used the captured resources to further expand his empire and improve security measures. His influence grew, and so did his opportunities. But Jason knew that every success attracts new enemies. He continued to be vigilant, developing new strategies and improving his operations. The Black Crows became an increasingly powerful and elusive force, capable of resisting any threat. There were new challenges ahead, but Jason was ready for them. His story continued, filled with new intrigues, battles, and victories. Jason Morton remained an unyielding leader, willing to do anything to preserve his empire. After successfully taking down Alberto Domingo, Jason Morton was at the pinnacle of his criminal career. His gang, the Black Crows, became a real threat to all competitors and authorities, and its influence extended far beyond North America. However, with new achievements came new problems. Another enemy has appeared on the horizon: Senator Jonathan Griffin, a fierce opponent of organized crime who has dedicated his career to fighting the mafia. Griffin became known for his speeches and legislative initiatives aimed at criminal gangs. His words about the Black Crows and their leader became increasingly louder, attracting the attention of the public and law enforcement agencies. Jason understood that such an enemy could seriously harm his business and reputation. He decided to act before Griffin became too dangerous. Jason began by introducing his people into the senator's circle. They collected information about his habits, schedule, and weaknesses. It turned out that Griffin often visited the same place, a country club, where he spent weekends with family and friends. This was key information for Jason. He developed a plan that included several stages. First, it was necessary to destabilize the senator's security. To do this, Jason's team organized a series of sabotages aimed at diverting the attention of the guards and creating a false sense of security. They hired several groups that staged attacks on various targets, distracting the main security forces. The next stage was preparing a false route. Jason knew that Griffin's guards were always checking the main roads and decided to use this to his advantage. He created several false tracks to confuse the guards and lead them to another path. Once everything was ready, Jason and his team began executing the plan. One evening, while the senator was relaxing at his country club, the Black Crows struck. They acted quickly and silently, neutralizing the guards and entering the club territory. Jason personally led the operation, knowing that success depended on his leadership and determination. The operation went perfectly. Senator Griffin ended up in Jason's hands. Jason decided not to kill him right away. Instead, he staged a demonstrative interrogation, recording the senator's every word. Griffin admitted to having connections with corrupt officials and criminal organizations, which came as a surprise to everyone. This recording became a trump card in Jason's hands. The recording was leaked to the media, causing a huge scandal. The senator's reputation was destroyed and his career ended. Jason was victorious again, but he knew it was only a temporary lull. Having strengthened his position, Jason continued to develop his empire. He understood that the struggle for power and influence never ends. He still has many battles and trials ahead, and every day brings new challenges. But Jason was ready for them. His story continued, filled with new intrigues, strategic maneuvers, and an indomitable thirst for victory. With the increasing influence of Jason Morton and his gang, the Black Crows, the number of enemies grew steadily. Rivals, corrupt officials, resentful allies, and international power structures all united in an attempt to topple him. Jason felt that the pressure on his organization was increasing every day. The enemies began to act with coordinated fury. A series of unexpected attacks and sabotage hit key Black Raven targets. In one such attack, a rival gang ambushed a weapons warehouse, causing heavy casualties and weakening Jason's position. His men were demoralized and rumors of betrayal began to spread. Jason knew he had to act quickly and decisively. He strengthened internal security and began a purge of the gang's ranks, trying to identify traitors and regain the trust of his people. However, the enemies were persistent. One by one, his closest associates became victims of carefully planned murders. One day, during a morning meeting, Jason received disturbing news. Several of his best men had been killed overnight. These blows were delivered with frightening precision, and Jason realized that his enemies had united in a powerful alliance whose goal was his complete elimination. The situation became more and more critical. Enemies began to spread false rumors and incriminating materials to destroy Jason's reputation among his allies. Many began to turn away from him, fearing they would become the next victims. Jason decided he needed to retreat temporarily to regroup and come up with a new plan. He ordered his remaining people to leave the city and take refuge in shelters prepared in advance. He himself went to one of his secret places to think about his next steps. At this time, the enemies wasted no time. They used his retreat as a sign of weakness and continued their attacks on the remaining Black Raven's targets. Jason has lost much of his influence and resources. He had to admit that his empire was on the verge of collapse. Despite all this, Jason did not lose his spirit. He began to look for new allies among those who were also dissatisfied with their enemies. Joining forces with several influential figures from the criminal world, he developed a plan to regain his power. One of the key targets was Carlos Mendoza, the head of a powerful gang who was one of the main initiators of the attack on the Black Ravens. Jason decided that the elimination of Mendoza and his closest associates would be the beginning of restoring his influence. At night, under the cover of darkness, Jason and his new allies infiltrated Mendoza's lair. The operation was fast and brutal. Mendoza and his men were taken by surprise, and in a fierce battle, Jason personally dealt with Carlos, avenging his fallen comrades. This success gave Jason new impetus. He began to methodically eliminate his enemies one by one, regaining control of the lost territories. Each new victory strengthened his position and struck fear into the hearts of those who tried to overthrow him. Despite loss and betrayal, Jason Morton has proven that his spirit cannot be broken. He returned to the top of the criminal world, ready for new trials and challenges. His story continued, full of struggles, strategic maneuvers, and ruthless victories. The Black Crows rose again from the ashes, and no one could predict what would happen next. Having strengthened his position after the elimination of Carlos Mendoza, Jason Morton began to rebuild his empire with renewed vigor. However, his enemies continued to weave intrigues, joining forces for the final destruction of the Black Ravens. Jason knew that the most difficult tests lay ahead of him. The new enemies included a powerful international coalition of rival gangs united under the leadership of Javier Ortiz, a powerful Colombian drug lord. Ortiz had enormous resources and connections, making him one of Jason's most dangerous opponents. Jason began to prepare for a new confrontation. He strengthened his network of informants, placing agents in Ortiz's circle to obtain information about his plans and movements. Jason also began to actively develop his legal businesses, using them to launder money and create a reliable cover for his operations. The first major attack by Ortiz's coalition came unexpectedly. Several Black Ravens targets were attacked simultaneously, resulting in significant casualties. Jason realized that his enemies were operating with incredible coordination and precision. He began to suspect that there was a traitor among his people. To identify the traitor, Jason organized an internal investigation. He used his skills as a psychologist and strategic maneuvers to lure the traitor into the light. It soon became clear that one of his closest associates, Marcus, was passing information to Ortiz. Jason quickly and ruthlessly dealt with the traitor, restoring trust in his team. Now, knowing that his enemies were preparing for a new strike, Jason decided to launch a preemptive strike. He gathered his best people and developed a plan that would destroy Ortiz's coalition. The main target was Ortiz's residence in Colombia, where he stored much of his resources and coordinated operations. The operation began at night. Jason's team entered the residence using all available means to bypass security systems. A fierce battle ensued inside. Ortiz and his men put up strong resistance, but the preparation and determination of the Black Ravens did their job. Jason confronted Javier Ortiz in person in his office. Ortiz was strong and experienced, but Jason, driven by a thirst for revenge for his dead comrades, gained the upper hand. In the final battle, he destroyed Ortiz, completing the operation in triumph. Jason's return to power did not go unnoticed. His enemies realized that the Black Crows were not broken and began to retreat. Jason's influence grew again, and his name once again struck fear into the hearts of those who dared to oppose him. Jason knew that new challenges lay ahead, but he was ready for them. His story continued, and each new day brought new opportunities and challenges. He remained an adamant leader, ready to do anything to preserve and strengthen his empire. The story of Jason Morton and the Black Ravens continued to unfold, filled with intrigue, strategic maneuvers, and an indomitable thirst for victory. No one knew what the future would bring, but one thing was clear: Jason Morton was not going to stop there. As Jason Morton's powers began to gain momentum again, his enemies decided it was time to strike a crushing blow. Fearing the rise of the Black Ravens to their former strength, they joined forces in a large-scale coalition. This coalition was led by several major criminal leaders and international intelligence agencies determined to put an end to Jason's empire. The coalition plan was carefully developed. They used all available resources and technology to organize simultaneous strikes on Jason's key facilities and people. They received information for the operation through numerous spies and defectors, whom they managed to introduce into the ranks of the Black Ravens. The day of the attack arrived. The enemies struck quickly and smoothly. Several elite units simultaneously attacked the main bases, Black Ravens, around the world. Special operations involving the best fighters and agents were launched in New York, Los Angeles, Mexico City, and other major cities. The main blow fell on Jason's headquarters, located in one of his most protected shelters. The enemy used all its power: drones, hackers, explosive devices, and special forces. Jason and his men were taken by surprise. The security system could not withstand such onslaught. The first explosions disabled the main security and defense systems. Jason's team, despite their courage and preparation, could not hold back the onslaught. The enemies penetrated inside and began to methodically destroy everything in their path. Jason watched the disaster from the command center. He understood that their chances of winning were dwindling every minute. His men fell one after another, unable to withstand the superior forces of the enemy. Soon contact with several key objects was lost. Realizing that the battle was lost, Jason decided to immediately evacuate those few who remained alive. He activated secret protocols and ordered his closest associates to leave the base through hidden tunnels and safe routes. He himself remained behind to ensure their withdrawal and destroy the remaining data and resources so that they did not fall into enemy hands. Eventually, Jason found himself surrounded. Enemies broke into the command center but were unable to capture him alive. He launched a final ambush, inflicting significant damage on the enemy before he himself was forced to retreat. The remaining 10% of the Black Ravens were scattered and disorganized, but Jason, hiding in one of his secret hideouts, was not ready to give up. He began planning his return, using all available resources and connections to assemble a new team and avenge his fallen comrades. The disaster was a harsh lesson for Jason, but also a source of renewed determination. He knew that his path would be difficult, but he was not going to stop. The enemies were to find out that even after such a crushing blow, Jason Morton and his Black Crows were ready to revive and strike back. After a crushing defeat and the loss of 90% of his gang, Jason Morton decided to hide in Italy. He chose a small town in the south of the country, where he hoped to hide and start a new life. He had long-standing connections in Italy, and he counted on the help of old friends. Jason settled down in a cozy house on the coast, far from prying eyes and the bustle of large cities. However, his enemies did not forget about him. The coalition united against the Black Ravens continued to pursue Jason, realizing that, even wounded, he remained dangerous. Among the leaders of the coalition was a powerful mafia boss, Luca Ricci, who had an extensive network of informants throughout Europe. He ordered his men to find Jason at any cost. The first weeks in Italy passed quietly. Jason, being careful, did not use his old connections and preferred to remain in the shadows. However, one day he decided to visit the local market to buy fresh food. There, he was accidentally noticed by one of Ricci's informants, who immediately informed his boss about Jason's whereabouts. Luca Ricci did not hesitate. He sent a group of his best men to track down and eliminate Jason. The informants continued to monitor him, carefully recording his every movement and habits. They soon learned that Jason often walked along the coast at certain times of the day when there were few people around. The day came when Ricci decided to strike. A team of 4 experienced killers entered the town under cover of darkness and took up positions along the route along which Jason usually walked. They were well prepared and armed, knowing that the enemy would be dangerous and unpredictable. When Jason went out for his evening walk, he was unaware of the deadly ambush. The killers acted clearly and harmoniously. One of them, pretending to be a tourist, distracted Jason's attention by asking him a question in broken English. At this moment, the other 3 killers surrounded him from different sides. Jason noticed the danger too late. Despite his skills and experience, he was no match for a well-prepared team. A short but fierce battle ensued. Jason managed to wound one of the attackers, but the forces were unequal. Eventually, one of the hitmen fired, mortally wounding Jason in the chest. He fell to the ground, feeling the life leaving his body. Images of the past flashed before my eyes, successes and defeats, friends and enemies. Jason knew his time was up, but he felt no fear. He knew that he fought to the last and did not give up, even when everything was against him. The killers quickly left the crime scene, leaving Jason to die on a deserted street. The next day, his body was found by local residents, and the news of Jason Morton's death quickly spread throughout the criminal world. His enemies celebrated their victory, but those who knew Jason respected him for his courage and tenacity. Thus ended the story of one of the most powerful criminal leaders. But Jason Morton's legacy lived on, reminding everyone that even in the world of crime, there is a place for honor and fighting until the last breath.